Hello and welcome to CGTN. I'm Dongshi live in Beijing. The final day of the 15th edition of the BRICS Summit is underway in Johannesburg, South Africa. Leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are meeting to boost cooperation among developing nations and improve global governance. The leaders, together with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and African Union Chairperson Felix Tshisekedi, will soon make their statements. CGTN will bring you exclusive coverage on the event, exploring how the BRICS mechanism works and how it contributes to global economic stability. And joining me today in the studio are Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. All right, Chinese President Xi Jinping called on emerging economies of the BRICS group to pursue peaceful development, strengthen their strategic partnership, and support multilateralism. In his remarks on Wednesday, Xi also called on BRICS to realize its values of inclusiveness and win-win cooperation by expanding the group. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa pushed for the use of local currencies to boost trade and investment among its members. CGTN's Waber Nagila has more from Johannesburg.
Leaders from BRICS member states arrived at the Sandton Convention Center in Johannesburg on Wednesday morning for a closed plenary session. According to officials, the closed-door session focused on how to harness the full potential of the grouping. In his remarks at an open plenary session, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, the host of this year's summit, said discussions on adopting the use of local currencies between member states was ongoing.
We are concerned that global financial and payment systems are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical contestation. Global economic recovery relies on predictable global payment systems and the smooth operating of banking, supply chains, trade, tourism, as well as financial flows. We will continue discussions on practical measures to facilitate trade and investment flows through the increased use of local currencies. This is a matter we believe that further discussions need to take place, particularly amongst our finance ministers.
Chinese President Xi Jinping outlined 4 areas the bloc should focus on to build on its achievements. They are the deepening of business and financial cooperation to boost economic growth, expanding political and security cooperation to uphold peace and tranquility, increasing people-to-people exchanges and promoting mutual learning between civilizations, and upholding fairness and justice and improving global governance.
国际规则要依据联合国宪章宗旨和原则。
International rules must be written and jointly upheld by all countries based on the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, rather than dictated by those with the strongest muscles or the loudest voice. Ganging up to form exclusive groups and packaging their own rules as international norms are even more unacceptable. BRICS countries should practice true multilateralism, uphold the UN-centered international system, support and strengthen the WTO multilateral trading system, and reject the attempt to create small circles or exclusive blocs.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi set out 5 areas for deepening cooperation between member states. They include outer space development, innovation, skills development, protection of wildcats, and traditional medicine. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who did not travel to the summit but attended via Videolink, said the BRICS' influence on global affairs was growing, adding that its strategic course was aimed at the future. Meanwhile, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva noted the gains the bloc had made over the years, including its inclusiveness. The tone of the summit has now been set with multilateralism at the head of the agenda. And with development cooperation amongst member states taking center stage, The expansion of the bloc and use of local currencies in trade will remain in the headlines for the duration of the summit. Bobot Nagela, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
President Xi Jinping says China stands ready to strengthen cooperation with developing countries. This was his message to his counterparts from Senegal, Cuba, Ethiopia, and Bangladesh in separate meetings with them on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. CGTN's Gao Yiming has more.
In his talks with Senegalese President Macky Sall, Xi Jinping noted the deepening mutual trust and cooperation between the two nations and the need to develop relations further. He reiterated Beijing's support for Senegal's efforts to safeguard its national stability and development, and the African Union's push to join the Group of 20. President Sall hailed Senegal's comprehensive strategic partnership with China and added that China-Africa cooperation meets the development needs of the African continent. He also stressed Senegal's adherence to the One China policy. President Xi Jinping relayed to his Cuban counterpart Miguel Diaz-Canel China's firm support for Cuba's efforts to defend national sovereignty and oppose external interference and sanctions. Xi noted the importance of the Group of 77, saying China will help the group safeguard the common interests and development rights of developing countries. The Cuban president expressed his country's support for China's Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative. He added that Cuba will work with China to deepen Belt and Road cooperation, build a Cuba-China community with a shared future, and uphold socialism based on their country's characteristics. In his meeting with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, President Xi Jinping said China is a reliable friend and a true partner of Ethiopia. He cited accomplishments between the two countries under the Belt and Road Initiative and the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. President Xi also said he would encourage more Chinese enterprises to invest and start their businesses in Ethiopia. He also welcomed Ethiopia's use of China's Green Channel to facilitate the entry of African agricultural products. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed expressed hope Ethiopia can learn from China's governance experience to help improve its goal of national development. He also said his country is willing to deepen cooperation with China in agriculture and mining. In his meeting with Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, President Xi said China will continue working with Bangladesh on initiatives in infrastructure, information technology, new energy, agriculture, and people-to-people exchanges. The two also vowed to support each other on the country's core interests. Hasina noted that the President Xi's state visit to Bangladesh in 2016 was a milestone in bilateral ties. She appreciated China's support to Bangladesh during the COVID-19 pandemic and the help it has extended in its economic development. Hasina reiterated Bangladesh's adherence to the One China policy. BRICS, she said, will open new development opportunities to developing nations. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
Now let's talk about this summit with my studio guests here, Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics, University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, fantastic to have both of you on our program today. The summit is really drawing to a close today. We've seen a lot of discussions and deliberations across a wide range of topics, beginning with expanded membership and then trading in local currencies. Professor Liu, let me start with you. What do you expect will be the outcome or consensus of any sort to come out from the summit this time?
Well, we do expect further integration of the BRICS and also the expansion of the BRICS in a more rule-based way. And it is also there to counterweight the pressure from the Western world with regard to the deficiency of the financial facilities to support infrastructure development, urbanization, digitization, and other type of innovation. And practical cooperation is very much on the agenda. You can see that the entire host of agreements and memos signed by different countries, particularly China, is under the spotlight in collaborating with each other. So this is something that is really unprecedented. And the other is that more of the members are showing not only the interest but also the realistic commitment to join this. And it shows that the BRICS really represents a very strong voice to have a united South-South cooperation.
And I mean, you can almost feel that the overall sentiment is a green light on expanded membership. You also have some reservation and pushback from certain members within the blocs about more countries joining. On this topic of expanded membership, what do you think will be the outcome here?
Well, I think, first of all, Zhengshi, that the forces behind the incredible desire to join BRICS are powerful and even irreversible. And I see these as both push and pull. So the pull meaning what is attracting these countries? I believe there's more than 40 that have expressed interest, more than 20 that have formally applied. Why are they so interested? What is pulling them in? I think one is that the size of the populations of these core BRICS countries, the economic vitality, and I think finally the vision for the future. So this is attracting these countries. There's also a push element as well, in that many countries have seen the dangers of the existing system, the weaponization of the global financial system, the need for alternatives. So I think this is creating an irresistible force and demand for expansion in BRICS. So now if we look at what are some of the reservations, as far as I understand, there is openness to expanding BRICS, but perhaps there's some questions about in what order and at what pace. So one of the outcomes I think that many people are paying attention to is exactly what the next stage of expansion will look like.
Gentlemen, we have so much more to talk about. Do stay with me here on our program. I'll be back with you in just a few moments. You are watching our special coverage on the BRICS Summit. We'll be right back after this. And for more on the summit, let me also bring in Robert Nagila in Johannesburg, Jim Stemmen in Dubai, and Adel El Marouki in Ras Sadr, Egypt. Robert, let me start with you. We were just talking about expectations from the summit this time. We're close to the end of the summit in Johannesburg. What can we expect from today's agenda?
Well, it's the last day of the 15th BRICS Summit. Now, we expect the leaders to begin arriving here in about an hour and a half for what is going to be a very busy schedule. Now, first order of business is going to be a family photo session, after which they will delve into that schedule. Now, among the meetings planned for today is a BRICS Africa outreach. This is a meeting where the leaders will engage various African leaders, state actors who've been invited for this summit, and other representatives from across the African continent. Among the issues they will touch on will be issues such as climate change, food and security, agriculture, peace and security, trade and investment, and other issues that will come up during this engagements. Now, we also have non-state actors that have been invited for this Africa outreach meeting. This include regional organizations such as the African Union, for example, and their input is going to be very, very vital, especially in planning sessions moving forward. Now, another meeting scheduled for today is the Leaders' Dialogue. Ostensibly, what they'll be doing here is they'll be reviewing the last few days, some of the decisions reached, some of the decisions that they still need to make. For example, the expansion of the BRICS bloc and the use of a single currency, agriculture, climate change, and other decisions. Now, we also expect several bilateral meetings on the side of this formal schedule to take place. We know that, for example, yesterday, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with several African leaders and leaders from around the world, including President Macky Sall of Ghana and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And then at about 5 p.m. this evening, there will be that final press briefing, which will be given by the chairman, where the media will be allowed to throw in a couple of questions about this entire summit.
Robert, obviously we've had 2 days of intense proceedings there. We'll be counting on you for more updates about the last day of the summit there in Johannesburg. Robert Nagila, thank you. Let me now talk to Jim Stemmen in Dubai. Jim, Gulf states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have expressed interest in joining BRICS. What are the features of this bloc that appeal to them the most? What are they looking for?
Yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning here that the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they are growing increasingly influential on the world stage, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic and the energy crisis. Now, this has put them in a unique position, and both countries also realize that the balance of power globally is moving from the West towards the East. And on that note, further aligning with China and India, these are major consumers of oil from the Gulf and home of future demand, just makes sense. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, alongside other Gulf countries, are very busy diversifying their economies, and BRICS membership could, of course, offer access to new markets for all Gulf countries. Accession into BRICS, as we mentioned, has the potential to really balance the power in favor of the East at this point. Saudi Arabia, as mentioned, has massive oil reserves. That is something that can be extended to the UAE as well, but the UAE on top of that is a commercial center and a major financial hub through Dubai, which would of course be helpful to BRICS as well. Having them join BRICS could also pose a challenge to dollar dominance in the global financial system. This is obviously something that's been discussed heavily over the past year, especially in recent months. The UAE, for example, has started some limited trade with India outside of the dollar, that's in rupees. So one can imagine a scenario where potentially oil could be traded outside of the dollar on a much larger scale in the future. I would say on top of that, joining BRICS is very much about aligning with future growth markets. The combined GDP of BRICS countries is now larger than that of the G7. So its economic and political influence is only likely to grow in the years ahead. And that's something that Gulf leaders very much recognize.
Yeah, Jim, a lot of this might not happen overnight, especially with the challenge, the dollar dominance, but you certainly can see this trend gaining a lot of traction with this BRICS summit happening in South Africa this time. Jim Stemmen live in Dubai for us today. Jim, we appreciate that report from you. And over now to you, Adel, in Egypt. Egypt's application to join BRICS has sparked enthusiasm and high prospects. What is your observation so far, and what is the outlook for the country's membership?
Well, Egypt's kinship to join the BRICS have been quite clear for a long time, and it only has been clear because of the strengthened bilateral relations that Egypt had with almost all 5 members of the BRICS. And today we have the Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli is leading the Egyptian delegation in South Africa. He will be addressing the leaders and also participating in several side sessions inside the BRICS talks. And all of this is only reflects how Egypt is invested to stand up as a strong nominee and a candidate for joining the BRICS. And with the bloc showing readiness to expand its capacity in general, Egypt is maybe one of the most prominent countries in Africa to be joining it. So, for instance, yesterday we've heard Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi presenting some criteria for countries to join, and one of these criteria is to have an evaluation for GDP per capita. And for Egypt, beside of course South Africa, which is already a member, Egypt maybe stands out across the continent in that criteria in itself. Egypt is almost head-to-head with Nigeria as the biggest economy on the continent. Its positioning, geographic locations, and at the North Africa, connecting the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, a hub for trade and industries, that is a vital connector between Africa, Asia, and Europe. All of this makes Egypt not only a beneficiary of the advances that it may get in terms of market access and collaboration with BRICS countries, but it also makes it a country that is capable to provide incentives for the BRICS bloc as well to expand their economic activities through Egypt. In general, there is massive excitement here because the Egyptian economy has been suffering from the impact the US dollar had on it with a crisis in foreign currency. The country has been suffering from for over a year now. Resorting to an alternative solution to the US dollar is also a vital and essential need for the Egyptian country. In general, there is, as you said, much of excitement here, and we're still looking forward to see exactly what the BRICS blocs will announce in terms of criteria for other countries to join, how fast and how big the bloc wants to get.
Adel, fascinating insight. Thank you so much for joining us this hour. Leaders of BRICS have advocated expanding the group's membership. Our reporter Zhao Yunfei tells us why BRICS has become an attractive proposition for countries in the developing world.
This is South Africa, and behind me is the Union buildings and the iconic Nelson Mandela statue. South Africa is the host country of this year's BRICS summit. One of the key topics on the agenda is BRICS expansion. South African officials say representatives from around 40 countries have shown a keen interest in becoming part of the group. Official requests have been made by 23 nations. These aspirations to join the group reflects a growing demand for a reformed world order, which is currently dominated by the West.
Them coming to the table with us will only strengthen the South-to-South cooperation that we need for a sustainable future. So I'm absolutely delighted that the countries have come knocking at the BRICS doors rather than us having to go to them.
The decision to expand the membership was reached at last year's Beijing summit. Now I'm here at the media center of the Johannesburg summit. The agenda says this year it aims to establish, quote, guiding principles, standards, and procedures to expand the BRICS.
Let's pick up that conversation with my studio guests here, Andy Mok and Professor Liu Baocheng. Andy, I found what you said fascinating about addressing the dangers of the existing system in the world, both for existing BRICS members and prospective new members here. But what does the rest of the world look at this summit in BRICS? Will they look at as, you know, members and new potential new members banding together to counter the G7? Because a lot of what we discussed here, de-dollarization, seems like the BRICS members coming together to circumvent the current existing financial system here.
Well, certainly this is the Western media narrative, right? That is portraying this in a fairly negative light. But I think if we look at it from the perspective of the rest of the world, so I talked about the push and the pull factors. So I think we're focusing on the push factors here. Why do so many countries, so many people around the world feel such an urgent need for an alternative? So first of all, what we've seen in this so-called liberal world order that is really one led by the United States is that the rules are made by a very, very small set of countries. We could say 5% of the world's population dictates how the rest of the world should live in many important ways. And I think there's a growing awareness that this is very, very unfair. So I think that's the first reason. The second reason then stems from this is that we see some of the mechanisms by which this kind of hegemony, perhaps we can call it, is being exercised. And of course, dollar hegemony, the control of the global payment system, SWIFT, the use of the dollar for settlement of important commodities like oil, et cetera, really have been a long-standing pain point for many countries in the world. But now this has reached, I think, the level of a crisis with what we see happening with Russia, where the U.S. weaponization of the system, including seizure of Russian financial assets, really shows just how dangerous this reliance is. So it's not just the countries looking to join BRICS, but I think many, many countries around the world are looking at this summit as a source of looking at it with hope and excitement.
Professor Liu, can you shed light on this topic also? How big of a crisis mode are we in that has really propelled the sentiments from the global south that they should come up with a way to really challenge the existing financial system and the unfairness in the system that we have right now?
Well, in addition to what Andy has described, one immediate consideration is the deprivation of the US dollar because of the interest hike going on in the United States. The dollar gets more expensive, and many of them are really thrown in a deep hole of paying those debts in US dollars. So that this really prompts them really to look for alternative to continue their trade settlement and also even to pay the principals and the interest of the US dollars they have really borrowed. And the other is that they are getting spooked by the sanctions over not only the Ukraine crisis, but many other local happenings that are not really satisfied by the United States to use the SWIFT system as a weapon. And third is that they are disappointed at the Western world in delivering their commitment. For example, in climate change, there has been commitments that at least the $100 billion US dollars needs to be given to support the energy transformation in the South countries. And as a matter of fact, so far, they have not really done it in a more efficient and sufficient way. And then, the more of these countries are realizing that they have to manage to stand on their own feet, but also they need to collaborate with more of the countries that are more dependable and also promising in the economic growth. So that's why this type of choice. And also immediately, every of these countries are going for the two engines for national development. One is industrialization, and the other is urbanization. They see that they have a lot more to share with the existing BRICS countries, and there's much more if there are more participating members, not only in terms of finance, but also in the skill sets that they can really cash in on.
Professor Liu, Andy, thank you so much. You're watching our special coverage on the BRICS Summit. We'll be right back after this.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
From the 1,035-kilometer railway linking China to Laos, facilitating connectivity and boosting economic growth in the landlocked Southeast Asian country, to the joint China-Saudi Arabia photovoltaic project to harness renewable energy in the oil-dependent kingdom. The Belt and Road Initiative has come a long way since it was first proposed in 2013, complementing the development strategies of partner countries and building on their existing strength. The Belt and Road Initiative, linking the world in the pursuit of common prosperity for humanity.
Now to some other news stories we're following for you this hour on CGTN. Wagner mercenary group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin is feared dead in a private plane crash north of Moscow. Russia's Federal Agency for Air Transport said Prigozhin was among 7 passengers and 3 crew that died when the Embraer jet en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg crashed on Wednesday. An investigation has been launched into the crash, which has raised questions about the future of the mercenary group. CGTN's Alyosha Milenkovic reports from Moscow.
The crash recorded by the eyewitnesses show the plane without one wing and a tail section falling to the ground like a leaf, with its engines still running. The same eyewitnesses claim that before they saw the plane fall to the ground, they heard two loud bangs. Yevgeny Prigozhin's last appearance was linked to a video published a few days ago on one of the Wagner-related Telegram channels. In that video, he was in full combat gear, holding a Kalashnikov automatic rifle in his hands, hinting that he and his group were somewhere in Africa. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Moscow.
Also today, Japan's controversial plan to release nuclear-contaminated water from the crippled Fukushima power plant has begun. CGTN correspondent Jack Barton has the latest in Fukushima.
What is the beginning of a first 17-day release got underway, and during that time roughly 7,800 tons of water that will be then added per ton. There'll be another 1,200 tons of seawater added to that treated contaminated water, and that's going to be pumped out of a pipeline about 1 kilometer out into the Pacific here, and then it will go into the ocean here, and of course slowly spread across the ocean. So that process has begun. It comes just weeks after the International Atomic Energy Agency head Rafael Grossi was up here. We were here at the time as well, signing off on all of this, saying that under the UN it is seen as safe, that the levels of tritium in particular that will be left in that contaminated water are definitely within the safe drinking levels of water, and yet still a lot of concern. Some concern here in Japan, but a lot of concern across the region. Of course, countries like South Korea and China, but even far afield in the Solomon Islands, anyone really who in the long term feels particularly their fishing industry is going to be affected by this release, which could take up to 30 years to complete.
China says it will take necessary measures to protect marine environment, food safety, and public health in response to Japan's impending release of nuclear-contaminated water from the defunct Fukushima power plant. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said at a news conference in Beijing that China strongly urges Japan to rescind its incorrect decision. Wang also said that China does not want August 24th to be a disaster for the marine environment, and Japan must bear historical responsibility for its actions. Our reporter Anne Chang spoke to Professor Kenneth Leung from the City University of Hong Kong on the impact of Japan's contaminated water discharge plan. Professor Leung is also the chairman of the Advisory Council on Food and Environmental Hygiene.
Professor Leung, Japan plans to discharge into the sea treated wastewater from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. The water, though treated, will still contain low amounts of tritium. There has been a lot of global concern. So let's talk about some of the health risks involved. Should people be worried?
There is uncertainty of the treatment process. The IAEA report also highlights that they could measure more than 7 types of radionuclide still remaining in the treated wastewater. Our concern is more than tritium, and there will be other radionuclides like cesium, strontium. They can remain with high radioactivities in the organism for a long time, like cesium for 30 years. So they still can release the energy, causing the mutation in DNA. Some of the mutation may end up with cancer in the living organisms.
The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, recently concluded that Japan's wastewater plants are consistent with safety standards and that there's negligible radiological impact to people and the environment. What do you think of this report?
I think you have to read the report with caution. They use a very simplistic model to predict without considering many other factors, okay? The tidal movement, the current, and also the sedimentation of those suspended solid. All this, they didn't really account for. When we see the video, the fish is just in an empty tank. But in a lactose setting, there will be sediment. The sediment will become the sink of many kinds of radionuclide. More importantly, we know that this tritium is a hydrogen-free, heavy hydrogen, and then they could combine or bind onto some organic suspended solid, then which can be the food for many small zooplankton, and also attached to the plankton as well. So then eventually they could be consumed by the higher consumer in the ecosystem. This kind of food chain effects they also discount.
Other countries regularly dispose of nuclear wastewater into the sea, and which also contains tritium. Why is Japan's case viewed differently? Some of those levels of tritium probably is even more than what Japan intends to release per year.
For the safely operated nuclear plant, they only generate this type of wastewater by annual cleaning or maintenance. And then the composition of those radionuclei, mainly tritium, okay? And also they only do this kind of discharge maybe once or twice per year. On the contrary, in the Fukushima incident, those water actually has a direct contact to the core of the nuclear substance. Then there will be over 100 different types of radionuclides there, and in very high concentration. The composition of the wastewater is totally different, and the magnitude concentration is very different. Then they discharge every day, every minute for more than 30 years.
A personal lawyer for former U.S. President Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, has turned himself in to authorities in the U.S. state of Georgia. Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, appeared in an Atlanta jail on Wednesday to face state charges arising from acts he took seeking to overturn the former U.S. president's 2020 election loss. Giuliani is among several people indicted last week, along with Trump and 17 others. They were charged with 13 crimes, including breaking the state's racketeering act and making numerous false statements about election fraud. And Trump is expected to surrender on Thursday to face his fourth criminal indictment this year. 2 weeks since the deadly wildfires on the Hawaiian island of Maui, the death toll stands at 115. Only 43 victims have been identified, prompting a call for relatives to provide DNA samples to aid identification efforts. CGTN's Dan Williams has the latest.
As the search for victims here in Lahaina continues, authorities have pleaded with relatives of the missing to provide DNA samples. More than 1,000 people remain unaccounted for following the blaze just over 2 weeks ago. The latest missing estimate comes a day after Maui Mayor Richard Bison had said the number was thought to be around 850. Authorities are now expected to make public a list of the missing in the coming days to try to narrow the search. Search crews with dozens of sniffer dogs have been searching the burn zone. Some 85% of the area has now been searched. Authorities have been asking family members to provide DNA samples to help identify victims. So far, only 104 samples have been collected.
Nearly 3/4 of the remains that have been tested for DNA thus far have generated searchable DNA results. We need family members to come forward and donate their samples so that we can compare them to these DNA profiles we've already generated from remains. This is a critical step in order to make an identification based on the DNA testing that's already been done.
The intensity of the fire has made finding remains complicated. There is still hope that the number of missing will decrease, but there is also a growing sense of dread that the death toll is likely to surge in the coming days and weeks ahead. Dan Williams, CGTN, Lahaina, Maui.
You're watching our special coverage on the BRICS Summit in South Africa. We'll be right back after this.
Climate change, economic uncertainty, and food insecurity. As the world faces multiple challenges, heads of state of BRICS nations and 55 African countries meet in South Africa with a common goal to promote multilateralism and sustainable development. CGTN will bring you in-depth reports and comprehensive analysis on one of the largest gatherings of developing countries. BRICS Summit 2023. Building an inclusive world.
Also joining us with insight into the BRICS Summit is Professor Syed Muhammad Marandi, Dean of the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome to our special coverage. The West, led by the United States, has placed Iran under heavy sanctions. To what extent has this pushed Iran to apply for BRICS membership?
I think this is definitely one reason. Across the global south, countries have been negatively affected by the policies of the United States and its European allies. This is increasingly so in China as well. Russia, of course, is sanctioned. Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, the list goes on. And so this is an incentive. Other countries that have not been sanctioned have been treated by Western governments as inferior. They've been prevented from making progress. Policies have been imposed upon them for many decades, policies which have never had a positive impact on these countries and have kept the power of the West or the hegemony of the West over much of the global South intact. So I think that there is a collective decision across the global South to take matters into their own hands, to make their own decisions, not only for themselves and their capitals, but also alongside one another collectively to be able to change the course of history in a more appropriate way where people across the world benefit from the potential that exists instead of everything being instead of the West attempting to keep everything for themselves and leave the leftovers for the rest of us.
Professor, Saudi Arabia has also expressed a strong interest in joining BRICS. Is BRICS, as a bloc, as a mechanism, as a platform, in a position to strengthen recently mended ties between Tehran and Riyadh?
Obviously, the two countries would benefit when they are both part of an important organization like the BRICS or other similar organizations, and that would help in bringing about further rapprochement. But I think it's much bigger than that, in the sense that we have for decades, if not centuries, but at least for decades, we've had institutions created by the West which controlled the global economy. For example, we've always heard about the G7. Since I was a child, the G7 was always there to make decisions about the future of the global economy. But the fact was that the G7 was thinking about their own economies, not about the economies of the Iranian people or the Chinese people or Russians or people in Western Africa or Eastern Africa or Latin America. So they have always been after their own interests. They speak about the international community, but for them, the international community is basically Western Europe and North America. Everyone else is basically inferior to them. Everyone else is subordinate to them. These organizations, such as BRICS, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, work as a counterweight to bring about greater justice. It gives the global South, non-Western countries, Asian countries, an opportunity to collectively work together to enhance their own interests and also to make Western countries understand that their place in the international community is not superior. Rather, they have to treat the rest of the international community with respect, and they have to look at them as their equals. And I think BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are key to bringing about this global change.
Professor Marandi, important insight and observation. Always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you.
Ethiopia has formally applied for full membership in BRICS. Earlier, we talked to Ethiopia's former envoy to China, Teshome Toga Chinaka. He says the country's huge market and fast-growing economy make it a priority for membership consideration.
Well, Ethiopia is, I think, a good candidate because we are about 120 million and the second largest population in Africa, which means a huge market, relatively speaking. And secondly, Ethiopia has one of the fastest growing economies, not only in Africa, but globally. Our GDP is growing and our economy is growing. So Ethiopia provides also ample opportunities for BRIC members to do business, economic business, investment business, trade business with Ethiopia. Ethiopia also is a very important country in the continent of Africa. So for any partnership in terms of on the issues I've just addressed, reforming global institutions, Ethiopia also plays a very important role. So I strongly believe that Ethiopia is one of the best candidates to be considered for membership.
In an interview, CGTN correspondent Alyosha Milankovich asks Vladimir Ilyachev, Russia's Deputy Minister of Economic Development, about the growth opportunities BRICS is bringing to its would-be member countries.
Hello, and thank you very much for talking to the Chinese national TV CGTN. It is evident that many countries around the world are interested in becoming members of the BRICS. Why is that? Why the BRICS is so attractive to other countries?
Well, firstly, it is in fact a new architecture of the multipolar world. The BRICS is attractive because it is an organization that is built on new principles. On the principles of equality, and the members of the organization are the largest economy in the world. Moreover, these are developing countries whose economies are growing very actively. First of all, of course, it is China and India, which not only have a very large economy, but are also countries with the largest population. These are very large markets. The economy of these markets complicates its structure every year. New industries are growing in them. Now they are very technological industries, not just the traditional export industries. Well, it is a very attractive platform for discussing possible new rules and principles of interaction, at the same time on terms of equality and not on the terms that can be found in other organizations. Regarding the new joint currency, at first there may be some benchmarks, some agreements on the currency or a basket of currencies. And the creation of payment systems that will allow payments to be made between the BRICS countries with a certain set of solutions that will allow the exchange rate to be correlated. In any case, the BRICS countries are actively developing trade in their national currencies. And from our point of view, this will gradually lead to the fact that, if not a fully fledged currency will appear in the BRICS system, it will take too much time. Then some quasi-instruments will be used for settlement between countries.
Our studio discussions continue with Andy Mok and Professor Liu Baocheng. My other guest from Iran just now, I think, had a great point. While the G7 has pretty much controlled the world economy in the past decades, the BRICS here will look out for the greater good of not just more developing countries, but the global south. Professor Liu here, how do you think BRICS as a bloc would differ from G7? Obviously, we're looking at not just increased rapprochement between member countries and potential new members. We're also looking at that all-important coordination in their individual economic policies, hence enhancing the economy, enhancing the greater good of the global south here.
Well, in addition to G7, Paris Club, the IMF, they are also having very tough lines on those countries who are really indebted, and those debts are really very much justified to support their economy, but right now with this more of the stringent requirement on transparency, but also on the eternal fiscal plan is really making them very hard to live with. That's one thing. The second thing is that you see the BRICS Bank is equally shared, because initially China wanted to table more, and eventually arrived on a very equitable footing that existing 5 members each take 20% of the share. I think this principle is going to be carried out instead of, in comparison with the IMF or the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, where those who have a bigger stake in it and from those wealthy countries really have controlling voting power. So this is a vast difference. And the other is that because BRICS Bank is there to start with to support the green infrastructure development, and people do see that this is really something that is badly needed, instead of talking about some conceptual levels like high-end services or aerospace, etc. So this is more pragmatically carried out. And then when the regional integration is going on after the sort of a multinational framework is not really functioning as expected, like WTO, and they do want to seek a polarized but the integrated, the regional type of collaboration. So BRICS is something that they can really look up to to expand not only as a financial facility, but also as a platform and even an organization, so that a new set of rules can be played out to support the facilitation of trade and investment among those participating members.
Andy, here's a question I think warrants some deliberations here. If BRICS expands, will it still be BRICS? First of all, good luck finding a new acronym for that. It's not like when South Africa joined the original four, you just need an extra S there. But will it still be BRICS? Why not have a brand new platform here?
Well, I think that's a great question, Zhongshi. And perhaps in a way, it doesn't matter. A rose by any name would smell as sweet, right? So whatever the name is, I think what's more important is the essence of the organization. And we've spent a lot of time, rightly so, on the materialist aspects. So currency, markets, even the number of people are all important. But I think there's another very important difference in contrast with the G7, and this is from an ideological perspective. So the G7 is largely led by the United States, which is very much driven by a rigid, dogmatic view of the world. In some sense, we could say it's not that it's a form of political fundamental extremism, meaning that there's only one way to do things, that's the right way, and if you want to do it differently, it's wrong. It's not only wrong, it's evil. So I think the philosophy behind BRICS is actually in many ways the opposite. It's inclusive, it's open, it recognizes that there are many paths to development and that each country has the right to choose its own path, and whatever path it chooses should be respected. And I think this is important to not overlook, that this philosophical difference is very, very important. And I agree with you that coming up with a catchy name is always a good thing. But I would also say we should pay attention to the essence of the organization. And I think one of the most important elements of the essence of any organization are its philosophy and its values. And I think for BRICS, as we've heard from the leaders in this grouping, that inclusiveness is one of the key concepts. And I think this stands in radical opposition to this Western idea of, again, this dogmatic, rigid, political extremism and fundamentalism.
Yes, Professor.
I think there is a choice and also a very delicate balance between flexibility versus integrity. Because right now, yes, people are really disappointed at the rigidity and also dogmatism of the existing financial order in the world, and particularly those international financial institutions. And in the meantime, the New Development Bank has been doing pretty well with very actually stringent criteria on how they can really place funds over certain projects and how the transparency, accountability are really being taken care of. So therefore, with more of the members participating in it, it's not really there to go into sort of tarnish the reputation that has already been there. So therefore, looking forward, I would like to see that these countries can go for a more the institutionalized collaboration with the set of rule books. For example, on one hand, they can really, more of the members can really join certain functions of the BRICS bigger platform. For example, already there are 3 other non-BRIC countries who are members of the BRICS Bank. And as for the contingency funds or arrangements, even private sectors can really participate in it. And for ministers' meetings or state leaders' meetings, yes, they can be more inclusive. But ahead we can really see that there is possibility that really they go forward a sort of free trade agreement where the participating members can be really resolved on a very calculated basis to reduce the tariff and non-tariff barriers, so that they can really promote the liberalization of the flow of the goods and also people and technology, within this membership.
I mean, this afternoon we're waiting for BRICS leaders and other delegates to arrive there at the summit to make prospective speeches about their vision and their views of what has been achieved at the summit this time. Obviously, there are added benefits to expanded memberships, but when we look at it, could it also complicate things, Andy, here? Could it make it very challenging and confusing to reach consensus here if we're talking about 10, 20 members in a bloc like this? What will be some potential impacts if expanded membership is green-lighted at the summit this time in South Africa?
No, that's absolutely true, Zhongshu. So I think any organization where we're talking about a group of individuals, a group of NGOs, companies, or a group of countries, whenever we increase membership, of course, coordination costs increase.
Absolutely.
So that is something that I think shouldn't be lightly dismissed. But at the same time, when we look at what makes great organizations, it's a shared vision, shared values, shared culture, I think is the best way to put it. And I think that, again, BRICS starts with a philosophical worldview of inclusiveness, representation of as many people as possible. I think a non-judgmental view of the world. And that, I think, gives me at least cause for optimism that differences can be worked out, that a better future can be created. And there's an old saying, some attribute it to an African saying, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So, and of course, again, there are costs to doing that. It takes time to organize people, get them on the same page. But certainly I think the vision and the objectives for BRICS is certainly very big. So in this way, I think it makes sense to include as many countries as possible.
Professor Liu, India and Brazil have expressed concerns about expanding too quickly. If we're talking about responsible expansion, if we get on a very technical level, what could that look like for you? What would make a expansion as responsible, as effective as possible?
Well, shared interest and common concern is really a starting point by which through dialogue and communication they build the trust, but eventually they need the rule book. So it's like setting up a restaurant. You need to build the service line, you need to build the kitchen procedures and also the recipe. Otherwise, too many cooks do really spoil the food. So right now, I think they really have very valid concern. This is not really a talk shop, but rather a workshop that can really proliferate the real benefit that is muchly needed by those participating members and also those candidates. So therefore, there should be not be a rush. And right now, I think the low-hanging fruit is also the bank. So right now, because the bank is also very inclusive and also eager to increase its capitalization, so why don't put up your check and also become a member of the bank. Now that bank also has its own operating charter and also commands credibility already.
Are you talking about putting up capital as a prerequisite for joining?
Absolutely. If you really want it, because so far there are two wings to this engine of BRICS. So one is the New Development Bank. The other is a contingency fund arrangement. So,
each with about $100 billion.
That's right. Whether you want to engage in a blackjack or Texas Hold'em, place your bet on it. And so that's the commitment. It's not really a free will, benefit-seeking ground. So that's one very important issue. The other is that what if disputes really arise? So right now, 5 countries can have a consensus. If you have 30 or even more, so how they can really, do they really respect majority votes, or do some countries have certain type of veto power, etc.? So that also needs to be clarified. And operationally, so far you do not really have a secretariat, and not to mention about many of those task forces that deal with specific lines of the projects. So they need to institutionalize with the right type of organizational capacity to really push things forward. So now that India and Brazil raised the issue to write the rule books, but who are responsible and who are really taking the leadership. So I could see that in many of those occasions, so countries can speak very loud of their concern and they can show strong enthusiasm, but what is really missing is also the sense of governance that moving on a calculated and timely fashion to drive things into the more in-depth and with the sort of a ratchet type of agreements. So this is something that the southern world needs to really increase their own capacity of governance by rule making and also by rule enforcement.
Well,
yes, Andy.
I was going to say, we talk about this question of governance, which was raised at the BRICS summit as another very important topic. I think we can see something here that I might call the second mover advantage, meaning that the world has a lot of experience now with multilateral organizations, the United Nations, some of the multilateral lending organizations like the World Bank. So these are the pioneers, as it were. But I think what the BRICS countries and China in particular has demonstrated great capacity for is learning from this first generation of organizations, this first generation of practices, fixing the problems and adapting, taking advantage of new realities as well. Look at the AIIB, maybe as one example. I think SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we could consider as another. So similarly, if we look at BRICS and expanded BRICS, I think some of the issues you raised, Professor Liu, are absolutely correct. But again, I think if we look at it from a governance perspective, this also represents an opportunity to apply both the positive and the negative lessons of experience to make sure that BRICS going forward is a better organization.
That's a very important observation because right now, when the IAB was born, particularly when it was initiated by China, there has been doubts casted over and whether are we able to manage it in a professional way and going for sustainability. But now it's a splendid success, and there are so many other countries, including many countries from the West, are really looking at it and participating into it with the level of respect. So there are already examples, and also there are already lessons by the old-fashioned financial institutions that hopefully they do have professional task forces and team to really summarize all the success stories and best practices and together to avoid those lessons so that they really shape up something that is really outstanding and credible and sustainable.
What an interesting point, gentlemen. Hold that thought. I'll be back with you in just a few moments. And you're watching our special coverage on the 15th BRICS Summit in South Africa. We'll be right back.
Climate change, economic uncertainty, and food insecurity. As the world faces multiple challenges, heads of state of BRICS nations and 55 African countries meet in South Africa with a common goal to promote multilateralism and sustainable development. CGTN will bring you in-depth reports and comprehensive analysis on one of the largest gatherings of developing countries. BRICS Summit 2023. Building an inclusive world.
Let's pick up where we left just now with my studio guests here. I mean, what an interesting point both of you mentioned. But if you look at BRICS now, from the beginning, it has been sort of not really an organization. It's been a soft organization without a secretariat. Now, when you talk about expanded members, some people say maybe you're going to need a harder structure to prop everything up. So institutionally, Professor, what do you think will be the changes here? Could there be a harder structure with more potential members now?
Yeah, I think now that the bank already has a shareholding committee, and right now they definitely need a secretariat that is really jointly selected based on the very clear and transparent set of the criteria in terms of the representation and also in terms of their professional capability. And second, there can be more of the task forces to be set up to target to certain areas, for example, certain sectors of the industries, and also how sustainability can be implemented towards the UN SDG goals. And they need to do a lot more of the literature research work into what Andy has mentioned, into the existing financial platforms, and how they can really coordinate, if not really counterweight, with the existing financial institutions, because the capitalization is still small to meet the rising demand of those countries. So coordinate with ADB, with AIB, or with the IMF and the World Bank, etc. So there needs to be a sort of a dialogue program with existing financial institutions, and also even with the Paris Club, and who addresses the debt issues going on in those countries, some of which are really existing members of it. And then there should be I would like to see more of the adjudication body to be over there. The reason that the WTO prevailed the GATT, in a way that because they have a dispute settlement body. So everyone comes with enthusiasm, but everyone has their own agenda, has their own development needs. So therefore, when there is a dispute, particularly when more members are there to be on the table, definitely there won't be a consensus all the time. So who are there to settle those disputes, and what type of arbitrational rules they need to follow, and what type of enforcement mechanism for those non-compliant and for those deviants. And so these should be there. Actually, this is going to be slow, but gradually we can really stack up the BRICS so that that's the way that we earn the respect and also credibility for all the participating members, and particularly to the business sector, because they want more predictability of who are there to make decision, and if someone falters, what will be the consequence, and what will be the compensation or remedy that is there to be available.
This is where things get tricky and complicated. I mean, with more members comes more power, comes more responsibilities. Andy, I know you'll want to add to this. Let me come back to you later in our program. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will share the outcomes of the BRICS Summit with members of the press. For more, let's check in with CGTN reporter Sun Ye. Sun Ye, all this afternoon, we're waiting to find out what has been achieved at the summit this time. I understand you're at the press conference. What are you hearing? What can you tell us?
Now, right now, the moderator just told us that press briefing by South African Ramaphosa on the outcomes of the BRICS, that could be starting in around 20 minutes. It's being postponed. Yesterday it was postponed, and now it should start 45 minutes ago, but it just announced we have to wait perhaps another 20 minutes. And as you said earlier, this is perhaps the thing everyone is watching for. Right now, I'm at the media place where they are waiting for this to begin, and and there are rows and rows of cameras, journalists, because we expect major announcements. And as you said, perhaps we will learn in 20 minutes about who is going to join the BRICS mechanism. Is BRICS mechanism expanding? Now, South Africa had said multiple times in the last 2 days over the summit in different conferences and in interviews with us that South Africa is here to see BRICS expand. They say they hope it to expand, and China has also in a previous statement says it supported the advance of BRICS expansion mechanism. And China says because BRICS is a positive and stable force for good, its growth will contribute to the world. And yesterday, India has also voiced its support for BRICS expansion, so we could be hearing more from it. And the other thing that could also come out from South African President's press briefing in around 20 minutes of the outcome is maybe there's something more about the financial institutions. The attending BRICS countries, they've been each voicing, including South Africa, the President Ramaphosa, he had said yesterday that some financial institutions in the world have been using those institutions to weaponize, to be political weapons to control other things, and BRICS countries, developing countries, are trying to find a way around that. Besides BRICS expansion and things with financial institution and perhaps talks of local currency use in trade in between the BRICS countries, we also expect more outcomes and announcements on developing countries or global south development. This BRICS summit comes under the theme of BRICS and Africa, mutual accelerated growth, sustainable development and inclusive multilateralism, and that theme has been stressed time and again, not only by attending BRICS leaders but also the leaders from African countries, some 30, almost 40 of them who've come to join. So something about global South development is also expected. And again, this press briefing should start in around 20 minutes. We'll keep you posted.
Certainly a lot of curiosity and suspense in the air there. We'll be waiting with breath that is bated to find out more from the South African host at the press conference there. CGTN Sun-Ye, we appreciate your update. Thank you so much. Check back in with you later. This year's BRICS Summit is highlighting the synergy between the organization and many African countries. Earlier, our reporter Sun-Ye spoke with Dennis Denia, a vice president of the African Export-Import Bank, on how China can play an important role in the African continental free trade area.
You were talking about inter-Africa growth, and China could be playing a role in that. What are the areas are you referring?
And there are a number of areas where we can cooperate mutually to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. One area where China has really excelled is in terms of education and skills development. In order for us to take advantage of the AFCT agreement, we need skills that are essential for the fourth industrial revolution. And China has made tremendous progress in terms of technological advancement, skills development. And I believe this is an area where Africa and China can really cooperate, resulting in a mutually beneficial outcome to the infrastructure gaps that exist across the continent. Whether we're talking about transportation, whether we're talking about health, and China has really made tremendous progress in terms of implementing large-scale projects. We need Africa to connect. All the countries need to have adequate connectivity in order to make the FCTA a success. I'm talking here about roads infrastructure, rail infrastructure, ports infrastructure, and the experience that China has gained will be beneficial to the African continent. And that's a huge area of opportunity for Africa to gain from the experience of China. It's not only there. You are aware Africa is home to 60% of the world arable land, and yet the productivity levels on the continent are the lowest among any region. And if you look at the progress China has made in terms of not only agricultural production but agribusiness, And this is a low-hanging fruit. Africa can really benefit from that engagement. And China will also benefit from cooperating with African countries in terms of agriculture and agribusiness as well.
How can the African continent benefit from working with the BRICS?
It will help them grow in a number of ways. One is in terms of access to technology. It's also capacity building. It helps them access to a bigger market. You know, the BRICS is South-South organization. We share a common history. We share a common pathway to economic development. So having a larger grouping of like-minded countries is going to be very beneficial to Africa.
Earlier, my colleague Jiao Yang spoke with the ambassador of South Africa to China. He explained Africa's role in this year's BRICS summit and why the BRICS mechanism is attractive to many countries.
As you see, the theme we've chosen is an appealing theme. Let's look at key things which we can do as developing countries. When you say partnership, I like to stress it. BRICS is a partnership. It's not a bloc. We're not competing with any other blocs. We're a partnership for development. We're a partnership for inclusive multilateralism. The first thing that we agreed with our BRICS partners for this year's theme, that let's prioritize what we call just energy transition. We're developing countries. We're still using quite a lot of fossil fuels, but we're quickly transforming this by adding renewable energies. But how do we do that in a manner that doesn't compromise your own people and transform their skills so they can adapt to new technologies? We're sharing those skills. We're saying we must help the world to recover from the pandemic. We're saying let's talk peace and multilateralism. Let's reform the UN's global governance system, including UN, to be inclusive, and even pushing the issue of the role of women, particularly in peace processes. We believe if we can involve more women in peace processes, our peace processes will be more stable than the current system. So those are good things which we are saying for the BRICS partners moving forward. That's why there's so much interest of people who want to join the BRICS because of direct benefits of BRICS.
And earlier we talked with Swara Sin, Professor of International Relations at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He says trading in local currencies can provide other options for international transactions and free countries from being held hostage to the US dollar.
We definitely know enormous amount of effort is being made in using local currencies. And local currencies are increasingly being invoked and being put to use. That itself is a reflection of how increasing number of countries are not really comfortable with the way dollar has been used by Western nations in both putting sanctions and putting certain nations out of the SWIFT system. So India, of course, stands together with BRICS nations in exploring use of increasingly local currencies and potentially launching a BRICS currency as well, not in competition or to undermine dollar, but as an alternative to have one more option for using an international currency. Just like, for example, euro is an international currency, we could have a BRICS nations launching another international currency to give more options to the countries so that they are not held hostage.
More countries are expressing their intentions to join BRICS. Here's a look at what the bloc means for the world.
BRICS is an emerging market group that includes Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. The bloc represents around 42% of the world's population. For the past 17 years since its establishment, BRICS countries have played a significant role in South-South cooperation.
The cooperations in the form of exchanging knowledge, exchanging policies, best practices is critical to enhance the performance in the sector and to contribute to the sustainable development countries. South-South cooperation is one of the mechanisms by which we can facilitate this cooperation. BRICS countries are champions, are committed to such cooperation.
BRICS countries also established the new development bank to bolster the development of emerging economies. Since its inception in 2015, the bank has approved financing for 99 projects, totaling more than $34 billion, and provided strong support for infrastructure construction and sustainable development of emerging markets in developing countries. As BRICS is playing a more important role in global society, developing nations are aspiring to join the group and realize common development and prosperity. Venezuela became the latest nation to officially apply to join the bloc, alongside more than 20 others, including Iraq, Egypt, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. In terms of contribution to world economic growth, BRICS countries are expected to surpass the G7 from 2023 onwards. According to Bloomberg's most recent calculations based on IMF data, BRICS will account for 32.1% of the world's growth compared to the G7's 29.9%. By 2028, the G7's contribution to the world economy is expected to decrease to 27.8%, whilst BRICS will account for 35%. With the increasing amount of trade between countries, BRICS nations have been exploring ways to use their own currency during transactions without having to convert into US dollars. During this year's meeting of BRICS Ministers of Foreign Affairs and International Relations in June, member nations underlined the need for using local currencies in international trade and committed to supporting rule-based, open and transparent global trade. Aside from trade and economic advantages, countries are hoping that joining BRICS can offer better cooperation in science and technology.
As a developing country, Thailand looks forward to cooperating with BRICS countries, especially in terms of exchange of best practices, in terms of science and technology transfer and cooperation.
Looking ahead, BRICS is also promoting common efforts to tackle several global issues, including climate change. The new development bank said it is on course to provide around $30 billion of financial support to member countries between 2022 to 2026, with 40% of the funds to be used to mitigate global warming.
Over 40 countries have expressed interest in joining the emerging market grouping. Of these, 23 nations have made formal applications. Sumitra Naidu tells us what the expansion of BRICS will mean for the geopolitical landscape and the challenges in defining membership criteria.
The 15th BRICS summit is being pinned as historic. Over 50 leaders from the global south are attending the meeting. It's the highest attendance for a BRICS summit in 20 years. Many countries are attending with the hope of finding a more strategic partnership within or alongside the BRICS.
And also this big topical issue at the moment of the possible expansion of BRICS. Over 23 countries have now formally applied for membership of BRICS. And this is the key issue that the leaders this evening during their retreat that they will be discussing. If a decision is taken that they accept new members as full members of BRICS to expand the family, this is going to redefine the geopolitical landscape in a big way. So with the possible expansion, and if you look at the caliber of countries that are knocking at the door, your Saudi Arabia, your UAE, Indonesia, and others, you can tell what this is going to mean. So this is how important this summit is.
While the BRICS are keen to expand, leaders will need to find common ground on the policy for expansion. There are mixed views on how an expansion will impact the grouping and its influence. Some are concerned that BRICS may lose sight of its mission to uplift emerging and developing countries.
So one of the things that the BRICS Sherpas and the BRICS foreign ministers had to work on prior to a report being presented to the heads of state who are meeting tonight was the criteria of, if they do push for expansion, who are the countries that they should consider and based on what criteria, so that you don't accept members that don't subscribe to the values that the BRICS members cherish, and also the vision they have. So the criteria has been very critical in deciding who comes in and who is not allowed in. That's number one. So no, BRICS would not have to change its culture, its objective, and the strong voice that it has become, particularly for the global south. So that will stand and that will continue.
BRICS has grown its stature and influence on the global stage, making it no surprise that it is receiving this much attention. However, it's still unclear whether the BRICS grouping is indeed ready to expand. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Officials from Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa have tackled issues crucial to deepening agricultural trade within BRICS and the challenges that exist. We get more details from CGTN's Julie Shire.
Increasing agricultural trade was in the spotlight at the 15th BRICS summit in Johannesburg. Member states India and China are big importers of food, but little is traded amongst the 5 nations.
We are important in a big market that is roughly over $300 billion. And China and India make up roughly about 85% of that. So we think about how do you deepen trade amongst ourselves, because most of those products, they actually coming from outside the BRICS.
One of South Africa's biggest farming companies exports most of its apples, pears and avocados to the United Kingdom, Europe and other parts of Africa. It does, however, believe expansion lies beyond those borders.
CZ2's mission is to grow the export market further and is hoping the BRICS summit will open doors into China and India.
I see the Indo-Pacific region as a very important target long-term for South African produce. We have all the resources in South Africa, but also Southern Africa. And the distance from our ports to the destinations, the harbors in the Indo-Pacific region, is shorter most of the time than it is to our traditional markets into Europe or the US.
A small percentage of South African produce goes to Brazil, Russia, India and China, although these markets hold huge potential for South Africa.
Our local markets are saturated, so there's not a lot of opportunity to grow there. If you want to enter into the business with marketable products in the local market, international trade normally gives you higher margins if you're efficient. We should be able to grow the agricultural industry with leaps and bounds.
Delegates agree that tough conditions which govern food exports need to be addressed.
The key thing when we're thinking about trade that we're putting on the table is how do you lower the import tariffs, and also how do you deal with phytosanitary barriers. So those are things that needs to happen. It's one thing to say let's deal with trade, but trade is not happening because the tariffs are higher and there are phytosanitary barriers.
South Africa exported a record $12.8 billion worth of agricultural products in 2022, around half of what it produced. The country is pinning its hopes on the BRICS nations to grow that further. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
India's first semi-high-speed regional rail service is set to begin operations this month. The Rapid X network will connect the capital Delhi with other urban centers in the national capital region. The project is being built at an estimated cost of $400 million and is co-financed by the Asian Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and New Development Bank. CGTN's Ravinder Bawa reports from Delhi.
RapidX will be India's fastest rail service. The semi-high-speed trains are expected to reach speeds of up to 160 kilometers an hour. A 17-kilometer section of the track linking Sahibabad and Duhai Depot is due to open to the public this month. For the first phase of the project, a fleet of 40 trains will carry around 800,000 passengers daily.
Multimodal integration provides us the advantage of carrying people across the public transport systems. So what we are creating is basically a huge network of networks. That means people who want to access educational institutions, hospitals, or centers of economic activity, everybody can travel.
The average time a RapidX train will take to travel a distance of 100 kilometers is just 1 hour.
students like me want to travel at very less cost, because our parents are investing a lot of money over us, and it will be more comfortable for us to travel, and our parents won't hesitate us to move us from one place to another. Yeah, and it will be a comfortable journey for women especially.
We take the state roadways buses, which are overcrowded and they take a long time to reach the destination. This will reduce the time of travel and it will be a comfortable journey. This route has a number of commuters as most buses are packed, so I'm sure that the trains will be full with passengers.
Operation of the new RapidX trains will be partially automated. The operator, DB India, says solar panels installed on stations and depots are one of the measures designed to help make the network more environmentally friendly. The 82-kilometer network is expected to be fully operational by 2025. Multimodal integration is the core principle of RapidX corridor. Many stations of the corridor are being connected to metro stations, railway stations, bus stops and airports. This is to make travel hassle-free and to encourage commuters to use public transport. Ravinder Baba, CGTN, Delhi.
Over the years, BRICS countries have been at the forefront of global economic growth. The IMF says in its report that BRICS countries are set to overtake the G7 nations and steer the global economy in the years ahead. Let's now take a look at some key facts about BRICS nations.
Emerging markets are on the rise. According to the International Monetary Fund, the proportion of GDP contributed by BRICS countries experienced a significant uptick, with a 17.3 percentage points rise between 2000 and 2022. In contrast, the GDP share of the G7 nations declined by 22 percentage points during the same period. Looking ahead to 2023, the IMF's projections reveal a compelling narrative. BRICS countries are anticipated to contribute a substantial 32.1% to global economic expansion, while the G7 nations are poised to generate a more modest 29.9%. This trend is anticipated to gain further momentum. The IMF predicts that the BRICS economies will take on a pivotal role in driving worldwide economic growth in the next 5 years, with their indicator projected to reach an impressive 33.6% by 2028. In contrast, the G7's share is predicted to dwindle to 27.8% by then.
Just an update on the summit. Right now, we're waiting to hear from South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who will be delivering a speech any moment now to summarize the outcomes of the 15th BRICS Summit in South Africa. We will be taking you live to the summit when that happens. But for now, let's talk about the summit with my studio guests here, Andy Mok and Professor Liu Baocheng. Gentlemen, before that speech happens, I do want to spend some time with you on the new development bank here. Professor Liu mentioned how this is an important function, a important wing of the BRICS mechanism, if you will. And here's some important facts. The new development bank actually has approved 99 loan projects totaling more than $33 billion so far, providing strong assurance for infrastructure construction and sustainable development in emerging markets. Can you help us understand how important this bank has been in the current structure of BRICS?
Well, the infrastructure development, particularly in the connectivity of the goods and also connectivity of information, is the precondition for any country really to take off. And second is really the energy transformation, because we can see that even in South Africa, when I was really having class, between Beijing and Johannesburg, and students sometimes they cannot log on simply because they had a blackout, and the energy shortage is really crippling their economic growth ambition. So the new development bank is not only there to cater to those needs of infrastructure development, both on the soft part and on the hard part, and particularly on connectivity of the information. And they are also going very candidly towards sustainable development by looking at the environmental the impact and abiding by the tropical principles by all those banks, and also that they also are looking at another criteria, whether it's going to have a sort of a showcase effect to support the cluster of growth. So in this way, through my research, that India really benefit a great deal more, because they are the people that can write very good feasibility studies, well, with affluent English, and also with the template they operate on, and also with their big lobbying power. But of course, many other countries can really benefit from all of it. And now the bank is really heading into what has been discussed is really the digital transformation, because yes, regressionally, the BRICS are going to beat the G7. But there is also one uncertainty that when the information technology, particularly represented by AI, is now in the hands of the wealthy countries. You can see that the particularly cluster in the United States, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera, they are really having an upper hand on it. But when those artificial intelligence are there to be monopolized or manipulated by the wealthy nations, I think this gap is going to be further widened, instead of the BRICS really are there to overtake the G7. So that's why over this summit, people really, and also President Xi raised a very strong voice that we need to work together to build the right type of groups to develop the artificial intelligence, so that we won't really miss the trend. So now the new development bank can really carve out certain portion of their resources to support such a very important program that it really they're not only pointing to the future, but also pointing to the equitable growth of the BRICS countries and more members to come.
Andy, the new development bank has an authorized capital of $100 billion, which is open for subscription by members of the United Nations. Help us understand how instrumental NDB has been in a grouping like BRICS.
Well, I think it's incredibly important, Zhongshi, because if we think about from a macro perspective, capital leads to infrastructure, leads to prosperity. So what makes New Development Bank unique is that, first of all, as a new organization founded, and in fact having developing country DNA in it, I think makes it unique, and in particular with China's role. So of course China not only is a source of capital, but through its own experience of lifting 800 million people out of poverty, developing the policies, the physical infrastructure to do this, has enormous expertise. So I think if we contrast the New Development Bank from legacy institutions like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, that are more rooted in a worldview and the experience of developed, wealthy countries, that this is very, very important. So I think this is incredibly vital to point out. The other piece I would say too is that when we look at infrastructure, of course, there has to be the physical infrastructure of water, sanitation, roads, electricity. But the digital infrastructure part of it is becoming increasingly pivotal, because what happens is what is really going to drive future prosperity is human ingenuity. And we think about all of the people in the world that are still lacking reliable access to the internet, whether that's because of electricity, whether devices, etc.
Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Let's take a viewer straight to that summit in South Africa, where leaders are arriving. We're expecting a speech from South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. You see all BRICS leaders are now arriving at the venue. This is the final day, obviously, of the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. Let's listen in.
Your Excellencies,
heads of states and government from the BRICS member states, the honorable ministers present from BRICS member states, ladies and gentlemen of the media, welcome to this session, the session that will present the Johannesburg Declaration of the 15th BRICS Summit. President Ramaphosa will, as chair of the summit and of BRICS, will kick off with the opening statements, and thereafter the President will invite his counterparts and colleagues from the BRICS member states to also present their statement. I'd like to now invite President Ramaphosa to kick us off with the media statement. Mr. President.
Thank you, Program Director, Your Excellencies, and various guests who are here with us, members of the media, and leaders of various organizations. It is a pleasure to present to you two matters. The first is to inform and advise you that the BRICS leaders in the 15th BRICS Summit have over the past 2 days had occasion to have discussions both in a retreat form as well as in a proper official summit. And in the course of those discussions, have reached a conclusion to adopt the Johannesburg II Declaration as a declaration that encompasses and covers the various issues that the leaders had to decide on. These matters have been in discussion for over a year in various iterations and meetings being prepared by our Sherpas and ministers in various meetings. And in the end, the declaration has now been adopted as Declaration 2, Johannesburg Declaration 2, and is adopted. And now we come to the media statement, which I will read out, and thereafter each one of the BRICS leaders will make a statement. We have successfully concluded the 15th BRICS Summit yesterday. It is the first BRICS Summit to be hosted in person since COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent global travel restrictions. Leading up to the summit, there was a wide-ranging BRICS business forum attended by some 1,500 business people from BRICS countries as well as from other countries from around the globe. This business forum was aimed at attracting investment, promoting collaboration, and showcasing opportunities within South Africa, the African continent, and indeed BRICS countries as well. We had an opportunity to receive a report from the President of the New Development Bank, Dilma Rousseff, on the vision and the role of the bank and the role that it intends to play to support infrastructure and sustainable development in Africa and in the Global South. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the BRICS Business Council and welcomed their report and the subsequent recommendations that they made to the leaders. We also welcomed the work of the BRICS Women's Business Alliance in their first in-person engagement with the BRICS leaders. We particularly welcomed the participation of youth representatives in the summit. We endorsed our expectations for the BRICS economic partnership to generate tangible benefits for our communities and deliver viable solutions for common challenges faced by the Global South. We shared our vision of BRICS as a champion of the needs and concerns of the peoples of the Global South. These include the need for beneficial economic growth, sustainable development, and the reform of multilateral systems. We reiterate our commitment to inclusive multilateralism and upholding international law, including the purposes and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. We are concerned about ongoing conflicts in many parts of the world. We stress our commitment to the peaceful resolution of differences and disputes through dialogue and inclusive consultation. The summit noted that an unbalanced recovery from the hardships of COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating inequality across the world. We encourage multilateral financial institutions and international organizations to play a constructive role in building global consensus on economic policies. We have noted that there is global momentum for the use of local currencies, alternative financial arrangements, and alternative payment systems. As BRICS, we are ready to explore opportunities for improving the stability, reliability, and fairness of the global financial architecture. In this regard, BRICS leaders have tasked their finance ministers and central bank governors, as appropriate, to consider the issue of local currencies, payment instruments, and platforms, and to report back to the BRICS leaders by the next summit. This summit reaffirmed the importance of BRICS people-to-people exchanges in enhancing mutual understanding, friendship, and cooperation. The summit appreciates the progress made over the last year in the fields of media, culture, education, sports, arts, youth, civil society, and academic exchanges. We adopted the Johannesburg II Declaration, which reflects key BRICS messages on matters of global economic, financial, and political importance. It demonstrates the shared values and common interests that underlie our mutual beneficial cooperation as the 5 BRICS countries. BRICS itself is a diverse group of nations. It is an equal partnership of countries that have differing views but have a shared vision for a better world. As the 5 BRICS countries, we have reached agreement on the guiding principles, standards, criteria, and procedures of the BRICS expansion process, which has been in discussion for quite a while. We have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process, and other phases will follow. We have decided to invite the Argentine Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become full members of BRICS. The membership will take effect from the 1st of January 2024. We value the interests of other countries in building a partnership with BRICS. We have tasked our foreign ministers to further develop the BRICS partner country model and a list of prospective partner countries and report by the next summit. Today, we will be hosting leaders from Africa and the Global South in the BRICS Africa Outreach and the BRICS Plus Dialogue. This is so that we can have an inclusive dialogue on key issues affecting developing economies and identify actions that we can take together towards a more equitable, inclusive, and representative world. May I conclude by thanking the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, and China, together with their delegations, for participating in this most successful 15th BRICS Summit held in Johannesburg, South Africa. Through this summit, BRICS has embarked on a new chapter in its effort to build a world that is fair, a world that is just, a world that is also inclusive and prosperous. I thank you. I'm now going to ask President Lula da Silva, President of Brazil, to be the first to speak, and thereafter I'll ask the others to follow. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank especially President Ramaphosa and his team for the very warmth hosting of the BRICS meeting and for the first face-to-face summit meeting at BRICS. I also would like to congratulate to the team of the foreign affairs ministers for all the extraordinary work that they did to conduct and the production of this declaration that we just signed here. The last time that I participated in a BRICS meeting was in 2010, and I am deeply, very well impressed with the maturity of the BRICS and with the results that we managed to reach. In 2011, with South Africa joining the group, gave much more representation to the groups, and including one of the regions that grow most in the world. Many said that we were too much different so that we can forge a common view. The experience, nevertheless, demonstrates the contrary. Our diversity strengthens the fight for a new international order that will accommodate pluralism in terms of geography, economy, and politics in the 21st century. In this world of transition, the BRICS offers us a source of creative solutions for the challenges that we face. The relevance of the BRICS is confirmed by the growing interest of other countries demonstrate to join our group. Amongst the many results of the summit meeting of today, I could stress the enhancement of the BRICS, including new members. As President Ramaphosa just said, it's with great pleasure that Brazil gives the welcome to the BRICS, to Saudi Arabia, to Argentina, to the new members, to Egypt, to the United Arab Emirates, to Ethiopia, and to Iran. Now, the GDP of the BRICS is going up to 37% of the world GDP in terms of purchasing power and 46% in terms of the world population. BRICS will continue open to new members, and for that we also approved criteria procedures for future members. We also approved the creation of a working group so that we can study the adoption of unit currency as reference for the BRICS. This measure could increase our options for means of payment and reduce our vulnerabilities. I would like to stress the decision that was made to the reform of the global governance, and especially in relationship to the UN Security Council. And last but not the least, I would dedicate a special message to my dear Alberto Fernandes, President of Argentina, great friend of Brazil and of the developing world. We will continue to move forward side by side with our brothers Argentinians in another international forum. We will continue to advocate themes with direct impact of the quality of lives of our peoples, as fighting hunger, poverty, and inequality, and the promotion of sustainable development. We will promote the overcome of all ways of inequality that exists in the world, and that the BRICS will continue to be a driving force of a new international order that will have more fairness and an indispensable player to promote peace, to promote multilateralism, and in the defense of the international order and rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Lula da Silva, for your statement. It now gives me a privilege to ask President Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, to speak.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, dear friends, dear colleagues, just like other participants of today's event, I would like to thank our South African friends for the efforts they have made during our joint work. I appreciate their efforts, and I would like to note, as it turned out, this was a challenging work, and President Ramaphosa showed unique diplomatic mastery as we negotiated all the positions, including when it comes to BRICS expansion. Just now, Brazilian counterpart President Lula da Silva highlighted the most important aspects for all of us, and I would like to especially emphasize the issues for mutual currency settlement, united currency issue. This is a challenging task. Nevertheless, we will move towards resolution. And the second thing that I would like to mention, it has to do with ensuring settlements between our countries in economic terms. I would like to congratulate new BRICS members on the full membership. They will assume their membership next year. Let me assure all of the colleagues that we will keep up with the work that we have launched to expand BRICS' influence in the world. Namely, I mean ensuring practical collaboration with new BRICS members and with those who will be working with BRICS within the outreach format, with our partners who pay attention to cooperation with our group and that are willing to work with us. We really appreciate and respect that, and we will definitely ensure a smooth work. Certainly, we will consult with all the colleagues on how to best arrange this work during discussions at the level of foreign ministers and other agencies. We will establish the relevant rules and procedures so that the role and importance of BRICS in the world continue to grow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, President Putin, for your statement. We now call upon Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. I asked him this morning whether the lunar module is still firmly on the ground on the moon, and he said yes. So yesterday we congratulated India for landing a lunar model on the moon. So maybe he'll be outlining the scientific aspects of how the lunar model is going to proceed forward. Prime Minister.
Excellencies,
Excellencies, friends from the media, Namaskar. First of all, I would like to commend my friend, President Ramaphosa, for the successful organization of this summit. I congratulate him for this. I'm very pleased that this three-day meeting has had many positive outcomes. On the 15th anniversary of BRICS, we have taken the important decision to expand it. As I had said yesterday, India has always fully supported the expansion of BRICS membership. India has always believed that the addition of new members will further strengthen BRICS as an organization, and it will give our shared efforts a new impetus. This will also strengthen the belief of many countries in the world in a multipolar world order. I am pleased that our teams have together agreed on the guiding principles, standards, criteria, and procedures for the expansion. And on the basis of these, we have agreed to welcome into BRICS Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. First of all, I would like to convey my heartfelt congratulations to the leaders and people of these countries.
I'm confident that together with these countries, we will be able to infuse new momentum and new energy into our cooperation. India has had very deep and historic relations with all of these countries. With the help of BRICS, new dimensions will be added to our bilateral cooperation also. For the other countries that have expressed a desire to join BRICS, India will contribute towards building a consensus for them to be a part of BRICS as partner countries. Friends, the expansion and modernization of BRICS is a message. That all institutions in the world need to mold themselves according to changing times. This is an initiative that can be an example for reforms in other global institutions that were established in the 20th century. Friends, just as my friend President Ramaphosa mentioned, about the moon mission of India. There were so many words of congratulations. And since yesterday, I have been here and have received so many words of congratulations from everybody and all across the world, in fact. This success is not to be viewed as the success of one single country. It is the success, it is being accepted as the success of all mankind. It is a matter of great pride for us and for the Indian scientists. It's a time for appreciation and being commended from all across the world. Friends, last evening, India's Chandrayaan successfully made a soft landing on the south pole of the moon. And as I said, this is a big achievement not only for India, but also for the scientific community all over the world. And the area which was identified as the target by India is an area where no efforts were made for landing so far. And this effort has been successful. In fact, the terrain is very difficult, and science was able to lead us to that terrain. So I believe that this is a success of science. It's a success of our scientists. On this very historic occasion, I have received, India has received, Indian scientists have received, and the entire scientific world of the entire world has received congratulatory messages and notes. I would like to thank all of you, not only from myself, but from all Indians, and also on behalf of the scientists, of my Indian scientists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Modi. It now gives me the pleasure to ask President Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, to make his statement.
President Ramaphosa, colleagues, friends from the press, I am pleased to join you here. At the outset, I wish to thank President Ramaphosa and the South African government for the thoughtful arrangements they made for the BRICS summit this year. BRICS countries are all countries with important influence and shoulder important responsibilities for world peace and development. During the summit, we had in-depth exchanges on the current international situation and BRICS cooperation, reached broad consensus, adopted the declaration, and achieved fruitful outcomes. Leaders of the 5 countries unanimously agreed to invite Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Iran, and Ethiopia to the BRICS family as official members. China congratulates these countries and highly appreciates the efforts made by our chair, South Africa, and President Ramaphosa. This membership expansion is historic. It shows the determination of BRICS countries for unity and cooperation with the broader developing countries. It meets the expectation of the international community and the common interests of emerging market countries and developing countries. The expansion is also a new starting point for BRICS cooperation. It will bring new vigor to the BRICS cooperation mechanism, further strengthen the force for world peace and development. I am confident as long as we work with a common purpose, there's a lot that BRICS cooperation can achieve, and the future will be bright for BRICS countries. Let us work together to write a new chapter of emerging market countries and developing countries working together in unity for development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Xi. Ordinarily, in the acronym of BRICS, after Brazil, Russia, India, and China having spoken, it would now be the opportunity for the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, to speak. But he has already spoken. So that brings us to the end of our press statement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attendance. We have reached the end. Thank you.
All right, the latest from the BRICS summit in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that BRICS has decided to invite 6 countries: Argentina, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become new members of the bloc. The expansion will take effect January 1st, 2024. CGTN's Zhao Yunfei joins me now in Johannesburg. Yunfei, what more do you have on this?
Zhongshi, the BRICS organization has just finished the first phase of the recruitment of new members. As you mentioned, they are Saudi Arabia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Iran, and Ethiopia. President Xi Jinping has just delivered a speech and he congratulated all of those members who have participated. And figure shows that after the recruitment, we'll be able to see that the BRICS member will account for 37% of the global GDP. In President Xi's speech, he said that during the BRICS summit yesterday, all 5 member states, leaders of all 5 member states, have talked about current issue that are addressing the world today. And he said that all the 5 nations have played an important role to the world's peaceful development. And the recruitment of the new members is very historical movement, and that will further unite the developing countries and will also provide more impetus to the economy, especially among the BRICS members. So basically, this is a celebration of the new emerging market as well as the developing countries. President Xi says that he hopes that the new move would give a new chapter to the BRICS mechanism. Now, Pudong, back to you.
All right, CGTN's Zhao Yunfei live at the press conference there in Johannesburg, where new members have been announced to be absorbed into BRICS. Yunfei, appreciate that update from you. Thank you so much. And let's talk about this new development with my studio guests here, Andy Mok and Professor Liu Baocheng. Gentlemen, I think many people will call this a success because before this summit, we have been talking about expansion for a number of years now. And it is this time in Johannesburg with the 15th edition of the BRICS Summit that BRICS leaders have finally decided on expanding the bloc. I mean, if you look at the original 5, there is diversity in those 5 members. And now if you look at the 6 new members, they come from different continents also. We have Africa, we have South America, we have those from the region of the Middle East, obviously. What do you make, Professor Liu, of the diversity embodied by those 6 new members?
It's really a splendid success because the BRICS are really having a breakthrough, whereas more of the vision for the new membership, which is going to be effect from the first day of next year. And this really represents the core value of inclusive development of the BRICS. And now with more of the new members that are able to join, so they are representing more of the global share of the economy, but more, also that they are able to be able to team up on the same platform with more of the resources so that they can really synergize to their own development and also to promote the multilateralism that is also being challenged by the existing global institutions and also global order. And so this is really a silver lining to the dismay that we have experienced after the 3 years of pandemic and after the fragmentation that was really able to be created by the status quo. So now, hopefully, they can really head not only with the financial collaboration, but more of the industrial collaboration and also the free trade collaboration, and also even within the extended bloc, so the bilateral arrangements can also take place to further deepen their ties to promote in the end, the welfare of their own nation, and also to give more confidence to the world that the South countries can really work together to generate something that is substantial and also more helpful on a long-term basis.
Andy, if we just zoom in on the 6 new members, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, why do you think that they were picked? Do they have anything in common? What do you think? What type of criteria do they meet here?
Well, I think we should first step back and really appreciate what a remarkable achievement this is. So BRICS started as a marketing idea from a financial services institution to attract investment in emerging markets. So these countries, this was not an intentional, conscious decision to create this organization. It was really a happy accident. And I think when I look at these countries that were selected, yes, there is a lot of diversity, but I think underneath the superficial diversity is a shared vision of what they want the world to look like. So this is partly a reaction to a world that has been driven by black and white thinking, us versus them, again, a very rigid, dogmatic view of the world. And I think the vision, the worldview of BRICS is inclusivity and respect for different systems. So I think this is a very, very important criteria for why these countries and other countries have applied, and also why they're accepted. And I don't know, maybe we'll come to this later, but I would especially draw our attention to the inclusion of Saudi Arabia and what this might represent for the future of the dollar. For we know that the history of dollar hegemony really is rooted in the grand Faustian bargain that Saudi Arabia made with the United States to accept only US dollars in exchange for selling Saudi oil. So Saudi Arabia being included, we connect this with the repeated emphasis in these statements of looking at alternative payment mechanisms, alternative currencies. I think the implication is inescapable that we may see very, very profound changes on the global financial system before too long.
All right, gentlemen, stay with me here on our program. And for more discussion, let's cross over live to our Johannesburg studio with CGTN anchor Tian Wei and our guest Ron Derby, the editor-in-chief at Mail and Guardian. Tian Wei, take it away.
Thank you so much, Zhongshi. As our guest earlier discussed, there's enormous amount of results and achievements, shall we say, from this 15th BRICS Summit taking place right here where we are at Johannesburg, Sandton Convention Center. In fact, the South African president has announced the Johannesburg Declaration 2. That is exactly the name of the document reached by the 5 leaders coming from the BRICS countries. Several areas we really need to give this feedback to our audience once again. One is the expansion of the BRICS. It now includes several more members, including Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, together with Saudi Arabia and UAE. Meanwhile, there's also the increasing use of local currencies to be discussed ever more from now until the next summit in 2024 in Russia. Now, the foreign ministers and central bank governors are going to take that risk among their discussion groups, and meanwhile, implementation is likely to happen in the future. Thirdly, there's likely to be more synergy among the BRICS members and, of course, the new BRICS members, including civil society, women, young people, think tanks, intellectuals, and the list goes on. So according to the South African President Ramaphosa, who's the host and the chair of this year's BRICS Summit, this is a very historical moment. Meanwhile, we also heard from the Chinese President Xi Jinping talking about peace and development. He talked about this is the importance of unity and cooperation. He also talked about this is a new starting point for the BRICS, bringing new vigors. Now, we are joined in the studio by a very seasoned and dynamic journalist coming from the host country of this year's BRICS, Ron Derby, chief editor of the Mail and Guardian. That is a national newspaper here. Good to see you, Ron.
Good to see you. Thanks.
I see you running around.
Oh yeah, it's been very busy week for us. You can see the whole Santa and all excitement about this summit. We've been waiting for a couple of months now. The energy has been building up towards it.
Excitement in the air. I was at the press conference before running into our studio today. You could feel people are excited about what the results is, because earlier people wonder whether there will be really that much result, and it happened.
It did happen. And this is the whole group BRICS. I mean, since 2018, our president has been pushing for the expansion of BRICS. So this is huge, and just for himself within the South African context. So it's a BRICS +6 grouping now. It's very exciting for us to see that shift in where BRICS can go. Yeah.
And the Chinese president also, during his delivery of remarks, conclusion remarks, he talked about this BRICS summit has bring so much in terms of BRICS cooperation, and the consensus is strong, and the trustful relationship among the BRICS members.
Yeah, I think if you look at the regional five, there is an alignment in terms of the global south and just where they stand in terms of their development. So there always was some alignment. I mean, our histories are different amongst those five regional nations, but there was some sort of shift that the world as it operates was kind of unfair to smaller emerging market countries like South Africa itself. So leveraging off Chinese strength in particular, and now a growing India, there's always a chance that the global south gets a new voice. So this is just a continuation of that, and more, I guess, a shift from the world evolved. The Cold War era after World War II. This is a different era now where the global south has a voice finally on the global stage.
Not only has a voice, but has a stronger voice now. Now, take a look at the expansion, 5 members, the expansion, rather 6. You have Egypt and Ethiopia, both coming from the African continent.
Yeah, these are huge economies. Ethiopia has always been a closed economy, but there's 80 million odd people there. So we've known for a long time that within to unlock Africa's growth potential, Ethiopia is important. Egypt as well, another major economy on the African continent. I think Nigeria at some point needs to join the party. But these are the key economies to unlocking just what is Africa, Latin America, and Asia, the world's new growth frontiers. So getting Ethiopia in, I think, was a big score. Getting them to open up their economy. There's an Africa Free Trade Agreement that just recently started. So these are all the key tenements to unlocking the potential of Africa as well.
From Latin America, Argentina, from the Middle East, we have Iran and Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are all important countries on the global supply chain. And you could also argue on the global cooperation for industrialization updates.
Oh yeah, you can see Saudi Arabia and UAE, I think, for energy and stuff with regards to our key tenements.
And new energy too, as they are enticing about that idea, indeed.
And you see, in South Africa, I don't know, you've been here for the past week, we still have load shedding, so there is energy issues across these emerging market countries, so getting them involved in our situation is very important. Argentina, long struggling economy in itself, needs to break away from its dependence, I guess, on the dollar.
Right now, as we know, during this year's summit, specifically talking about developing countries, global south, in need of industrialization, not just infrastructure anymore. So looking at the new members, in addition to the original 5 members, we are seeing a very well-developed global supply chain and global industrialization chain as well. This is really amazing.
Yeah, this is true. Like, for the longest part, I'm talking on Africa's case, we've been raw materials. That's about it, getting out the continent and we importing finished products. So there has been almost a maturity, a graduation, as it were, in the conversation on the continent about these trade relations. And I think amongst these different partners, there'll be a better understanding of just what Africa needs, almost a better deal for Africa and a better deal for Latin America and dealing with and Asia as well, which are, again, the growth frontiers of the world.
Indeed. The Chinese president has been talking about the unity, but also at the same time he mentioned that this is going to be a new starting point with new vigor. Now, not only looking at the new members, the expansion, but also the use of local currency. Earlier, the president of the New Development Bank, Dilma Rousseff, has already made it very clear that that idea is not only being discussed, but actively. So leading up to 2024, the summit then, what do you see as the most important points in terms of how this idea will be discussed and be practiced already among the members?
I know that India and I think that India and Saudi Arabia, or UAE, already trade in local currency. So there is experimentation happening on a smaller level. So I can imagine Saudi Arabia, UAE is a much bigger economy than South Africa. So that can be an easy opportunity. But it is a chance just to, I guess, diversify away from the US dollar. In South Africa's case, whatever happens in the US Fed when they set interest rates, that directly affects how we respond in South Africa. So that has been an unequal measure. And rightfully so, the US must respond to the US issues. And so the problem is for a small country like South Africa, we have to follow on them. It's just,
exactly,
it is what it is.
Because the US dollar is the currency.
Yeah, it is what it is.
So in terms of international financial governance and fairness, this is at least one of the ways to go. And it seems a lot of things are already happening. So before we wrap up, we also want to mention that during the declaration by the BRICS leaders, we are seeing a lot of support for peace and cooperation, peace and development, international law, and also the following of a dialogue, as well as inclusive development. So all of these are principles important coming from the global south. That's a voice ever increasing, as we have seen reflected by the BRICS mechanism. 6 new members being added. Currencies of local currencies of the BRICS economies will be further used among themselves in order to create alternative payment systems. Now, back to you in Beijing. This is really a very successful and fruitful BRICS summit here in Johannesburg.
Absolutely, Tianwei. New starting point, new vigor as the BRICS continue to contribute to world peace and stability, as mentioned by the Chinese president there. Appreciate your interviews. Thank you so much. And for more on Egypt's addition to the group, I am now joined by Adel El-Marouki in Ras Sadr. Adel, walk us through the implications here now that Egypt is a member of BRICS.
It is a relief for the Egyptian country and the government specifically. The plans to join BRICS has been extreme implementation and care through which President Abdel Fattah Sisi himself has been following up and trying to make sure that this milestone for Egypt's diplomatic and economic relations would be achieved. Through this membership, Egyptian businessmen, the government and all business-related communities have been looking forward to that, which will support the Egyptian industries in finding bigger and new markets. It will also boost bilateral economic cooperation, through which, for example, we have countries like Russia and China having their own industrial complexes here in Egypt, right at the Suez Canal, part of the Suez Canal developmental zone. And this is particularly one of the vital sectors that Egypt will be contributing with to support and be an influential part of the BRICS blocs. That's also besides the financial benefits that Egypt has been already seeing, the beginning of which when Egypt earlier this year joined the New Development Bank of the BRICS bloc as an alternative source for state financing and establishing a new financing system. It also improves bilateral trade. Many of these countries have been, like Russia and China as well, have been in talks with Egypt to create some part of that bilateral trade volume between them in local currencies. So that will also be another step to boost such cooperation and having trade in currencies much less stressful to the economy in comparison to the US dollars as well. And it also comes just a day, just yesterday, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, who was in South Africa, by the way, to represent Egypt's delegation, both were talking about new plans for the country to add some 3 million acres of agricultural land to give Egypt a boost in its agriculture and raw material production, which is also a vital step for Egypt's contribution to the system. That's beside, of course, what benefits and investments Egypt will be expecting from the bloc into its own land. So this is a win-win situation, another example of the positivity for developing countries uniting, for them supporting and for boosting South-to-South cooperation in general. It's a win-win, and definitely with initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative put together as a massive global initiative. All of this serves these economies and will help these countries in their new unified format. Adding 6 countries to the BRICS bloc is a huge step, and the implications of which doesn't seem to be anything else but positive.
Adel, we appreciate that timely update from you. Thank you so much for keeping us posted on this issue. Appreciate it. And for more on the UAE's addition to BRICS, Jim Stemmen again joins me via Skype in Dubai. And Jim, let's talk about the UAE and Saudi Arabia together here. I guess the issue of trading oil products in currencies other than the US dollar will be up again for discussion after both countries become new members of BRICS here.
Absolutely. So Saudi Arabia has huge oil reserves, and so does the UAE. The UAE is a commercial and financial center for the Middle East and increasingly the global South as well. There has been a lot of discussion over this past year of de-dollarization, and certainly now that both of these countries will be part of BRICS, that does open the door for the potential to have more trade outside of the dollar. In the UAE, we've seen some experimentation when it comes to this, specifically after the implementation of a new trade deal with India. So there has been some trade outside the dollar in rupees, and we're expecting to see more of that in this part of the world. But, they're not abandoning the dollar. I think it's more a case of experimenting and seeing what's possible. But certainly this kind of sets the stage for a scenario whereby, the UAE, Saudi Arabia could trade even more with India and say China when it comes to oil and energy. And this is where Gulf nations in particular expect to see most of the demand in the decades ahead. So it certainly is, it has the potential of being a game changer, I think, for the global economy.
Far-reaching implications here. We'll keep watching and monitoring. Jim, we appreciate that update from you. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's also hear from Eduardo Castro, Brazil's band group. Earlier, he spoke with Dr. José Ricardo dos Santos Luz Jr., co-chairman and CEO of Lida China, and Edgar Maciel, editor of International Affairs of BAND, on BRICS economic cooperation and the new development bank.
And really they get some sort of a commitment in this meeting in order to put it on, to let it go. How long do you think is going to be the process until it really becomes something real in the business between these countries?
Well, as Nelson Mandela said, everything seems impossible until it's done. So we do have to foment debates between all the countries, the 5 countries, ministers of economies, and
they're
also,
all there,
yeah, they're all there, but have specific forums for that, not only for the BRICS as a whole, but in terms of this subdivision of BRICS, because there are several steps which have to be fulfilled. So there is, I think that there's no turning back. But again,
once it's gone,
it's gone. It's gone, for sure. The new development bank is a very fresh bank. It's a very new one. But on the same time, if everything went wrong, for example, and we decided not to go through BRICS anymore, I would say that at least there was something very useful that was generated from the BRICS countries, which is the New Development Bank. Why? Because the New Development Bank pays a lot of attention on social development, on infrastructure, and sustainability. And for that, the New Development Bank provides loans not only for the BRICS countries, but for the developing countries that are in need. And this is what BRICS is about the Global South, which has been started to gain voice, to gain muscles. So that's even the reason why, there are so many countries willing to join BRICS, because it's an alternative to the reform of this, the reform of the global governance. We are talking about an inclusive multilateralism. We are talking about fairness and justice. It's a win-win game.
I think in Brazil have 21 projects invested by the bank.
Yes, already.
Yeah, already.
Yes, already. So
on the move.
Yes, yes. And we are talking about several interesting projects that maybe it's going to be an alternative, as you said, as you well said, in terms of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It's not a criticism against them, but it's an alternative that we are bringing to the developing countries.
But President Lula said he wants to see the New Development Bank bigger than IMF. Is it possible to believe that this group of countries, this set, who is going to be bigger, are going to be able to put all these all the needs together to make it happen the way President Lula said he would like to see?
Eduardo, I really don't have a crystal ball.
No.
But I would say...
I'm sorry to bring one.
But I would say, honestly, it's a good point, because people did not pay so much attention when BRICS was built. And after
it was just an acronym.
Yes.
It was just an idea.
Yes, for sure. And it began with Jim O'Neill, the economist of Goldman Sachs, telling about the BRICS, right? The acronym of BRICS. And in the end, you can see the world is paying attention. Even UN was paying a lot of attention on BRICS, because now BRICS is an alternative for the Global South to express themselves. What do we want, what do we need, and how we can operate in terms of our needs. If you look at South Africa, for example, the decades that they suffer from colonialism, the COVID era in which there were several African countries which were forgotten by the developed countries.
Well, in case you missed our broadcast earlier, here is South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing that BRICS has decided to invite 6 countries to join the bloc. Take a listen.
We have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process, and other phases will follow. We have decided to invite the Argentine Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become full members of BRICS. The membership will take effect from the 1st of January 2024.
Let's talk about all of this with my guests here in the studio. Gentlemen, well, hold that thought. I know we're having some movement in Johannesburg. Let's go straight back to the summit in Johannesburg. It looks like we're expecting another speech from South African President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We now have the opportunity to commence with the BRICS Africa outreach and BRICS Plus dialogue. Would like to thank you all for being here. I will make my opening remarks, and thereafter, in the order of the letters of BRICS, I will allow the other BRICS leaders to speak as well. Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, President Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros and Chair of the African Union, Your Excellencies, leaders of BRICS nations, Excellencies, leaders of Africa and the Global South leaders, leaders of regional institutions, honorable ministers, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Paul Mashatile. It is a great honor to welcome you all to South Africa for the BRICS Outreach and BRICS Plus Dialogue. When reflecting on the purpose and the role of BRICS in the world today, we recall the Bandung Conference of 1955, when Asian and African nations demanded a greater voice for the developing countries in world affairs. The conference called for the recognition of the equality of all nations, both large and small. We still share that common vision of a fair and a just world. We still seek to overcome polarity and division. We want a world without barriers between North, South, East, and West. We still seek a world in which we work together, underpinned by mutual respect. Through the 15th BRICS Summit and this dialogue, we should strive to advance the Bandung spirit of unity, friendship, and cooperation. In South Africa, we have a word that we use to describe friendship, cooperation, and we call that Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a practice based on the understanding that our success, our prosperity, and well-being depends on the success, prosperity, and well-being of others. That is why we also use another South African term about our identities, whilst respecting the identities of others. We often say, I am because you are. And that is a recognition, and that is the respect that we want to accord to one another. We see the BRICS partnership as a catalyst for global growth and development and response to the needs of all nations. It is the right of Africa and the entire global South to fully reap the benefits of global trade and investment. Without trade and investment, our economies cannot thrive and our people's material conditions cannot improve. As the African continent, we are determined that the continent's substantial resources are harnessed for the benefit as well as for the development of the people of Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area, once fully operational, will unlock the benefits of the continental market and generate substantial opportunities for African countries, but also for other countries. To make use of these opportunities, Africa is looking to BRICS partnership to unlock infrastructure and development financing. This was part of the founding vision of the new development bank. This bank is playing a leading role in efforts to increase the resilience of the Global South and to bring fairness to the global trading system, the financial system, and to strengthen BRICS currencies. We have to reform global economic, financial, and political, as well as the multilateral trading system, so that we can create a conducive environment for fair trade. While many countries of the Global South are seeking significant progress in industrialization, in technological development, in innovation, and the digital economy, they are not fully reaping the economic benefits of their efforts. By working together, by sharing skills and capabilities, by mobilizing resources, we will be able to give renewed impetus to the global growth and sustainable development. We need to move beyond expressions of solidarity towards inclusion, mutually beneficial economic cooperation as well. We trust that this dialogue that is being attended by some 65 countries will provide leadership, vision, and hope as we strive together for a better Africa and for a better world. It is for this reason that I welcome you all warmly, and I welcome you all on behalf of the BRICS leaders who have just issued their declaration, which outlines a number of important aspects. The BRICS leaders have also taken a decision to expand the BRICS membership, and that announcement having been made, we welcome those new members, but at the same time, that is the first phase, and other phases will follow, and we welcome various other countries in the partnership of the BRICS countries. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here. I thank you. Having done that, I now would like to invite President Lula da Silva, the President of the Republic of Brazil, to take the floor.
Obrigado, Presidente Ramaphosa. Obrigado, companheiros presidentes dos países que compõem os BRICS. Eu gostaria de cumprimentar o presidente Ramaphosa por dedicar este debate à parceria dos BRICS com o Sul Global, em especial com a África. É hora de revitalizar a cooperação entre os países
cooperation between developing countries. Today, we see the emergence of new challenges which add to the long-term problems. We have been hit by a pandemic, by new conflicts, and by a urgent climate emergency in the moment when we were working for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. When the Agenda 2030 was adopted, it outlined a path for a better future. Today, half of the targets are delayed, and we have seen setbacks or stagnation in pretty much a third of them. Food insecurity went back to 2005 levels. Democracy, in many places, is under threat by extremism or has corroded by xenophobia. Once more, we are under the risk of a nuclear war.
The world has gone backwards. Many of the answers that we seek for us to build a world that will be more equitable are located in Africa. COVID-19 has eliminated thousands of lives, although the unjustifiable hurdles to access to vaccines to Africa, they've presented a very low mortality rate nevertheless. While concerns on security limited more and more the sharing of technologies, the African Union launches a digital transformation strategy, and hundreds of startups and innovation centers come up in Africa. At the same time, where proliferates unilateral measures that threaten the integrity of the trade regime, the African continent has become in the largest free trade area of the planet, with 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. As multilateral bodies fail to respond to the threats to peace, the African Union takes growing protagonism in the conflict resolution. On one hand, excludent alliances are reborn and accelerate tensions, and on the other hand, African countries are getting together to preserve the peace zone and cooperation between the South Atlantic. But as also in other regions, Africa, it's quite evident the great constraints and refrain that are imposed on the developing countries. The globalization promises were not fulfilled. Many nations see today that are limited by unpayable foreign debt. In the last years, the volume of resources directed to the global south through trade and investments have been diminishing. The greatest part of the world, the developing world, depends on the export of commodities, where the demand is volatile and the goods imports of first needs are very difficult because the prices went up. At the same time, financial institutions impose high interest rates and conditionalities that narrow the action space of the state. It is impossible to promote sustainable development if the national budget or the public budget is consumed by the foreign debt service. To fight the climate change offers us an opportunity to rethink financing models, trade, and development. The energy transition cannot bring back again the exploitation relationship of the colonial past. We need solutions that diversify and add value to the production of the developing countries. The most evident signal that the planet is becoming a place with more inequality is the growth of hunger and poverty. And this is unacceptable. Although its magnitude, these problems are not treated with the urgency that they deserve. The emissions of the 1% richest part of the world population are 100 times higher than the 50% poorest. As the Kenyan environmentalist Wangari Maathai, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, we quote, "We would like to put the blame on the poor for the destruction of the environment, but frequently the powerful ones, including the governments, are the true responsible." End of quote. We have sustainable forms to enhance the agricultural output, create income, and offer social protection. And this was what we discussed in the Amazon Summit meeting in the city of Belém in Brazil, in the Amazon region. And this is what we want to discuss with the other countries that have tropical basins like Congo and the Borno Mekong. Brazil will take over the chair of the G20 in December, and we want to put back the inequality reduction as the core of the international agenda, to reduce inequalities. We cannot do that without greater representation from Africa. So that's why we advocate the entrance of the African Union as member of the G20. Now, with my trip to South Africa, and then I will follow to Angola and to São Tomé and Príncipe, I intend to open a new cooperation agenda between Brazil and Africa. Let's go back to our universal vocation and rebuild our historical ties with the developing countries. Prosperity is only full when it is shared. The presence here of dozens of leaders from the global south shows that the world is much more complex than the mindset that came from the World War, the Cold War, that some wants to reinstall. And instead of following the rationale of competition that imposes automatic alignments and that will foster mistrust, we have to strengthen our collaboration within the global south. The world with welfare and well-being for all is only possible if we have an international order that will be more inclusive and more solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Lula da Silva. I now want to call upon President Vladimir Putin, the President of the Russian Federation, who will be addressing us via video conference from Moscow.
Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude for the South African chairship for the arrangement of this representative summit of the BRICS Plus outreach. This format of communication is of utmost importance. It offers us a great opportunity to discuss in substance the relevant topics of mutual interest with those countries who largely share the attitudes of the five with the like-minded states. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you, dear friends. We all stand for the building of a new multipolar world order, a one that is truly balanced and takes into account the sovereign interests of as many nations as possible, and opens possibilities for implementation of various development models, while making it possible to preserve national cultures and identities and traditions. Let me stress, BRICS is not competing with anyone and is not opposing itself to anyone, but it's also obvious that this objective process, the process of emerging of a new world order, still has fierce opponents who try to slow down this process, to contain the emergence of new independent centers of development in the world. The countries of the so-called Golden Billion are doing everything in order to preserve the previous unipolar world order. They are comfortable with it. It benefits them. They try to substitute the world order by the rules-based order, although no one has seen these rules. And they use these rules for their narrow interests, and they adjust them to fit their political interests at any time in accordance with the interests of certain states. In effect, it is the same colonialism in a new package. By the way, it doesn't look so good, and modern-day colonizators, under the guise of benign mottos of human rights and so on, try to resolve their problems at someone else's extent by pumping out resources of other countries. The president of Brazil mentioned the debt burden of developing countries. Well, of course, on the one hand, they pump out huge volumes of resources, and on the other hand, they create a sort of credit relations that paying these loans off is almost impossible, and it looks not like loans but as contributions. The world order is threatened by the radical neoliberalism imposed by some countries that is aimed at eliminating traditional values that matter for all of us. I'm talking about the value of family, respect for national and religious traditions. They try to do so to serve their own interests, and some countries even justify extremism, xenophobia, and connive with terrorists. The global majority, represented by countries present here, is getting increasingly tired of all sorts of pressure or manipulations. But it is ready for equal and mutually respectful cooperation. That is the attitude taken by the BRICS countries. That's how we treat the development of multifaceted relations with many countries present here and other interested countries on the regional and global basis, including such regional structures as CIS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Caribbean countries, the Gulf countries. Bearing in mind that most African countries participate in today's event, today BRICS focus is on Africa. And we in Russia can only welcome it. We believe it is right, especially so as it is the Republic of South Africa that holds the chairship. Many dear friends, we met with many of you quite recently in St. Petersburg at the second Russia-Africa summit, where we held constructive discussions. In St. Petersburg, we reaffirmed that Russia and Africa have ever stronger friendly ties and mutually beneficial relations. The foundation for these relations was laid in the times when the African continent was struggling for its independence. We value that African countries have a friendly attitude to the Russian country, and in its turn Russia is interested in further deepening its multifaceted ties with the African continent. We will actively promote these ties, translate them in practical cooperation in various fields. Our particular focus lies on providing African countries and the world market with grain and fertilizers. We have all opportunities to make our contribution to the global efforts to resolve the hunger problem and not to allow the food crisis. So we can only welcome that for the second year in a row we have record crop yields, and as I already mentioned, in the coming months as a priority assistance project we'll allocate 25 to 50 tons of grain to African countries, and we'll ship it free of charge. That's what we mentioned in St. Petersburg. Right now we are concluding negotiations with our African countries on these issues. We are doing so despite the obstacles created by others, in particular illegitimate sanctions imposed against our exports that complicate insurance and settlement processes. Our African friends can rest assured that Russia will always remain a reliable food supply and will continue to support the countries most in need. Russia takes a responsible attitude to its obligations in terms of energy exports. Largely, these exports are oriented on the emerging markets. Russian raw materials and fuels make it possible for the friendly countries, including African countries, to contain price rises and enhance agricultural and industrial production, thus strengthening their energy security and economic resilience. According to some estimates, by 2050, world's population will raise by 1.7 billion people, and the energy supply will raise by 22%. So it's obvious that for the foreseeable future, there is no alternative to coal or hydrocarbons, meaning that the energy transition that is necessary, the energy transition to low-emission economy, should take place in a gradual and balanced manner. It should be well calculated, taking into account national peculiarities and possibilities of the respective countries. By the way, some countries are already facing the effects of the efforts of the mistakes they committed when planning this energy transition, and problem is exacerbating. We see a solution in effective use of all energy resources while implementing clean technologies, and obviously, together with our BRICS partners, we stand for strengthening the equal and technological cooperation in such fields as the use of renewable energy sources and in other important areas, including development of new types of atomic reactors, promotion of hydrogen technologies, and so on. By the way, in these fields, Africa is our priority partner. Currently, in different fields, we are working on about 30 projects with participation of Russia. In 16 states, we are operating in a very active manner. In Egypt, for example, Rosatom is working on construction of Daba, a nuclear power plant, and the total capacity of our energy projects amounts to 3.7 gigawatt. Over the past 2 years, there has been an increase by 2.6% of the exports of Russian raw materials, petrol products, and liquefied natural gas. 2.6% rise. The exports of food, energy resources, cooperation in other economic fields, as well as in the fields of culture, education, sports. All of these applies not only to Africa, but also to other regions, and naturally to the countries invited for the BRICS outreach countries.
We will build constructive win-win relations with everyone. We will enhance partnership, and our country has a lot to offer. In this regard, let me note that next year, Russia will assume BRICS chairship, and upon instruction of our colleagues, we will ensure the working conditions and the work with the countries that cooperate with us within the BRICS Plus and BRICS outreach formats. Dear colleagues, by way of concluding, I'm confident that the current meeting would be very useful. It will help bolster friendly relations between the BRICS 5 countries, but next year there will be an increasing number of new members. It will help galvanize cooperation on various tracks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Putin. I now want to call upon Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, to take the floor.
Excellencies, अफ्रीका की भूमि पर आप सभी मित्रों के बीच उपस्थित होकर मुझे बहुत प्रसन्नता हो रही है।
I wholeheartedly thank President Ramaphosa that in the BRICS Outreach Summit, he has given us the opportunity to share views with countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In the last 2 days, in all of our discussions in BRICS, we have laid emphasis on the priorities and concerns of the countries in the Global South. We believe that according special attention to these issues by BRICS is a need of the current times. We have also decided to expand the BRICS Forum. We welcome all the new member countries. This will make global institutions and forums more representative and inclusive, and this is one step towards such efforts of ours. When we use the term Global South, it is not just a new diplomatic term. In our shared history, we have together opposed colonialism and apartheid. It was in this land of Africa that Mahatma Gandhi developed the powerful concepts of nonviolence and peaceful resistance, tested them here, and then used them in India's freedom struggle. His thinking and ideas inspired great leaders like Nelson Mandela. Based on this strong history, we have given a new shape to our modern relations. Excellencies, India has accorded high priority to its relations with Africa. Along with high-level meetings, we have opened 16 new embassies and high commissions in Africa. Today, India is Africa's 4th largest trade partner and 5th largest investor. Whether it is power projects in Sudan, Burundi, and Rwanda, or sugar plants in Ethiopia and Malawi, whether it is technology parks in Mozambique, Côte d'Ivoire, and Eswatini, or campuses established by Indian universities in Tanzania and Uganda. India has always accorded priority to capacity building and infrastructure development in African countries. Under the Agenda 2063, India is a reliable and close partner in Africa's journey to make Africa a global powerhouse of the future. In order to tackle the digital divide in Africa, we have granted more than 15,000 scholarships in the area of teleeducation and telemedicine. We have constructed defense academies and colleges in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and in Tanzania.
We have deployed teams to Botswana, Namibia, Uganda, Lesotho, Zambia, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Tanzania to provide training. Approximately 4,400 Indian peacekeepers, that include women as well, are contributing to restoring peace and stability in Africa. In the fight against terrorism and piracy as well, we are also working together with African countries. During the difficult times caused by the COVID pandemic, we supplied food products and vaccines to several countries. We are now also working together with African countries on joint manufacturing of COVID and other vaccines. Whether it is cyclones in Mozambique and Malawi or floods in Madagascar, India has always stood shoulder to shoulder with Africa as a first responder. Excellencies, from Latin America to Central Asia, from West Asia to Southeast Asia, from the Indo-Pacific to the Indo-Atlantic, India sees all countries as one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the whole world is a family, has been for thousands of years the basis of our lifestyle. This is also the theme of our G20 presidency. In order to mainstream the concerns of the Global South, we have invited 3 African countries and several developing countries as guest countries to the G20 summit. India has also proposed permanent membership of the African Union to the G20. Excellencies, I believe that BRICS and all the friendly countries present here today can work together to strengthen a multipolar world in order to make global institutions representative and to keep them relevant. They can help ensure progress in their reforms. Counterterrorism, environment security, climate action, cybersecurity, food and health security, energy security, building resilient supply chains are matters we all have equal interest in. They represent unlimited opportunities for cooperation. I invite all of you to participate in our international initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, One Sun, One World, One Grid, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, One Earth, One Health, the Big Cat Alliance, and the Global Center for Traditional Medicine. I invite all of you to join India's digital public infrastructure stack to benefit from it for your development. Yesterday, we will be very pleased to share with you our experience and capabilities in this area. I am sure that our shared efforts will give us new confidence to address all challenges together. I once again express my gratitude to all of you and in particular to President Ramaphosa for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Modi. It now gives me pleasure to ask President Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, to take the floor.
Your Excellency President Ramaphosa, dear colleagues, let me begin by thanking President Ramaphosa for preparing the dialogues. I am delighted to join you all in this discussion on global development. Development embodies our people's aspiration for a better life. It is the top priority for developing countries and a timeless theme for humanity. As the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is due for a midterm review this year, the delivery of most SDGs remains slow. This is a cause for concern. and the global development endeavor faces formidable challenges. The international community must pursue the larger interests of all countries, respond to people's concerns, and restore development to the center of the international agenda. The representation and voice of developing countries in global governance should be increased, and developing countries be supported in realizing better development. It is also important to uphold true multilateralism, forge a global development partnership, and create a secure and stable international environment for shared development. Colleagues, over the years, China has stood in solidarity with fellow developing countries through thick and thin. China has been and will always remain a member of developing countries. I proposed the Global Development Initiative precisely for the purpose of calling on the world to stay focused on development and lending impetus to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Last year, China held the first high-level dialogue on global development, where a host of measures for development cooperation were unveiled. Encouraging progress has been made since then. We have put development first and allocated more resources. China has set up a global development and South-South cooperation fund with a total funding of $4 billion. And Chinese financial institutions will soon set up a special fund of $10 billion dedicated to the implementation of the GDI. We have taken results-oriented actions and deepened practical cooperation from Asia to Africa, from Pacific Island countries to the Caribbean. Over 200 cooperation projects have come to fruition, and cooperation mechanisms are growing in areas such as poverty reduction, education, and health. We have unleashed the power of innovation and built up momentum for development. Under the GDI, we have prioritized green development, new type industrialization, the digital economy, and some other key areas, and pursued a partnership on new industrial revolution to boost high-quality development. We have tided over difficulties together and made development more resilient. Food and energy security bear on the economy of a country and the well-being of its people. We have launched a China FAO South-South Cooperation Trust Fund, implemented the Food Production Enhancement Action, and provided food assistance to and shared agro-tech with many countries. We have also initiated a global clean energy cooperation partnership with a view to achieving energy security. China is a friend that Africa can count on. Over the past decade, China has provided a large amount of development assistance to Africa and helped build
more than 6,000 kilometers of railway, over 6,000 kilometers of highway, and 80+ large power facilities on the continent. Going forward, China will carry out more cooperation with African countries to support Africa in enhancing its own capacity for development. Specific measures will be taken, such as providing satellite mapping data products, implementing a smart customs cooperation partnership, and launching with UNESCO a GDI for Africa's Future action plan to support sustainable development in Africa. Colleagues, a Chinese adage reads, "Victory is ensured when people pool their strength. Success is secured when people put their heads together." Let us stay committed and united to build a community of shared development and make sure that in the process of global modernization, no country is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, President Xi Jinping. We also have the privilege of having the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I now call upon Secretary General Antonio Guterres to address us.
Distinguished heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking President Cyril Ramaphosa. We take great inspiration from the Rainbow Nation's extraordinary path to unity through action and justice. That is what our world needs: unity for action and unity for justice. We are confronting existential challenges. The climate crisis is spiraling out of control. A global cost of living crisis is raging. Poverty, hunger, and inequalities are growing against the objectives of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. New technologies are raising red flags without a global architecture to deal with them. And geopolitical divides and conflicts are multiplying with profound global implications, especially the impacts from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Excellencies, we are moving towards a multipolar world, and that is a positive thing. But multipolarity in itself is not enough to guarantee a peaceful or just global community. To be a factor of peace, equity, and justice in international relations, multipolarity must be supported by strong and effective multilateral institutions. Look no further than the situation in Europe at the dawn of the last century. Europe was multipolar, but it lacked strong multilateral mechanisms, and the result was World War I. As the global community moves towards multipolarity, we desperately need, and I have been vigorously advocating for, a strengthened and reformed multilateral architecture based on the UN Charter and international law. Today's global governance structures reflect yesterday's world. They were largely created in the aftermath of World War II, when many African countries were still ruled by colonial powers and were not even at the table. And this is particularly true of the Security Council of the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions. For multilateral institutions to remain truly universal, they must reform to reflect today's power and economic realities, and not the power and economic realities of the post-Second World War. In the absence of such reform, fragmentation is inevitable. And we cannot afford a world with a divided global economy and financial system, with diverging strategies on technology, including artificial intelligence, and with conflicting security frameworks. The IMF estimates that such a fracture could cost 7% of global GDP, a cost that would be disproportionately borne by low-income countries, mainly in Africa. And so I've come to Johannesburg with a simple message. In a fracturing world with overwhelming crises, there is simply no alternative to cooperation. We must urgently restore trust and reinvigorate multilateralism for the 21st century. And this requires the courage to compromise in the reforms that are necessary for the common good. And it requires full respect for the UN Charter, international law, universal values, and all human rights, social, cultural, economic, civil, and political. And it requires much greater solidarity. Of course, none of this is easy, but it is essential. And it is essential especially for Africa. The African continent, a historic victim of slavery and colonialism, continues to confront grave injustices. On average, African countries pay 4 times more for borrowing than the United States and 8 times more than the wealthiest European countries. And African countries accounts for just 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but it is an epicenter of climate chaos, suffering disproportionately impacts of climate change. And so looking ahead, I saw 2 priorities for action and justice. First, on the economic front. Redesigning today's outdated, dysfunctional and unfair global financial architecture is essential, but I know it won't happen overnight. Yet we can and must take practical action now. The Sustainable Development Goals stimulus I have proposed, an effective debt workout mechanism, and other steps necessary to multiply the resources available for developing countries are vital for sustainable development in Africa and to give options to African governments to support the development of their peoples. We must also drastically step up climate action and climate justice. I have put forward the Climate Solidarity Pact, in which developed countries provide financial and technical support to help emerging economies in Africa and beyond to promote an equitable and just transition to renewable energy. And I have presented an acceleration agenda to boost these efforts, with developed countries committing to reach net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040 and developing countries as close as possible to 2050. And developed countries must also finally keep their promises to developing countries by meeting the 100 billion goal, doubling adaptation finance, replenishing the Green Climate Fund, and operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund this year. And as a matter of justice, Africa must be considered a priority in all these efforts. Excellencies, we will not solve our common challenges in a fragmented way. Together, let us work to advance the power of universal action, the imperative for justice, and the promise of a better future, and I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations. Your Excellencies, there are almost 65 of us, and this forum has been designed so that everyone should be able to make a statement. I will not be making any commentary in between to ensure that we do conserve time. I similarly would like to request that when we speak, we should remind ourselves of the time limit that we have put aside for each one of us to speak. So I do beg for your indulgence in that regard. My next speaker will be His Excellency Azali Osunami, President of the Union of Comoros, but also the Chair of the African Union, President Osunami.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président et chers frères. Monsieur Antonio Guterres, Secrétaire général de l'Organisation des Nations Unies,
of the United Nations, dear colleagues, and then head of a government, all protocol observed, I greet you in the name of God. It's an honor for me to take part in this gathering and then to bring the contribution of the African Union to this exchange, to this forum. And I'm hoping that this is going to be very fruitful for the countries that we're representing here. So allow me, before I get into the subject, to extend our thanks, our gratitude to President Ramaphosa, to the South African government and the South African people for the warm welcome that was given to us on our arrival in this country. So we're also expressing our gratitude for all the measures that have been taken to facilitate our meetings and then make our stay here in South Africa most enjoyable. The land of Nelson Mandela, our biggest leader, a figure who's making the continent very proud. So, dear delegates, the African Union that I have the honor to come and represent here this year, 2023, so is giving a very important meaning to work with countries in BRICS. So, it considering that as a very most important opportunity for countries to explore together the areas of cooperation that would be beneficial to all of us. And then for that, to see how the bloc can also expand to other African countries, it's a process that will contribute to multiply benefit associated to this cooperation. So various capacity of BRICS in various sectors, it's a very important benefit that will foster the growth and the development of the African continent. So today, Africa is faced with many challenges, especially to the issue of food security, which is something we cannot accept because our continent, which possesses 70% of arable land in the world, is registering a deficit every year in the area of food security, ranging up to $200 billion. So BRICS, with its multi-form capacity, can help the Africa to become independent in the area of food security by putting in place new technologies to improve the sector of agriculture. So Africa is also faced with the issue of industrialization because the continent has got enormous reserves of raw material, but unfortunately they do not have a capacity to exploit and then transform these minerals on our African continent. So the collaboration between BRICS and Africa would allow to develop production units and transformation units in the area of a big program of industrialization that will favor the green transition. Finally, on the pharmaceutical sector, BRICS has got a capacity to develop a partnership with Africa in order to promote research in the pharmaceutical area, but as well encourage the increase of pharmaceutical products. The example of vaccines in South Africa, especially during COVID, that has demonstrated that African countries, not only they've got techniques and necessary technologies, but they also have a capacity to contribute to the world efforts to improve the fleet. So I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate the availability of the African Union in this partnership between BRICS and the African Union. It's a frank partnership that will last longer and win-win. So, ladies and gentlemen, trade relations between Africa and the BRICS are multidimensional. So they are illustrated in many advantages that are linked in the South-South Summit. It's important to underline that BRICS represent one of the major trade partners in our continent, and our economic weight constitutes it's something major that cannot be compared with something else in the world. So African countries will wish in the area of this partnership and then funding that will be created by BRICS, such as the new development bank, which the objective is to fund development projects while underlining sustainability. At the moment where our continent is trying to go through some reforms in world financial infrastructure, we are urging BRICS to play a role of a pressure group for those reforms and also structural reforms and deeper. The world financial architecture are very important to respond to the needs that are not being taken account into the world architecture. With regard to debt that is putting African countries in trouble, so the African Union has put in place a working group in order to propose means so that to see how to sort out this African debt. So that will be put in place by BRICS to benefit countries in our continent if those funds became operational. In fact, this would allow African countries to access loans with better conditions of repayment, which will be advantageous for countries that are facing prohibitive cost to the world financial market. Beyond all this, so that is linking the two parties. Our continent is the potential to offer to BRICS benefit of opportunities, especially in the area of geopolitics, economics, security, and cultural sector. It's the case of the free trade area that are offering to the countries of BRICS unique opportunities to reinvigorate their effort to foster trade relations with emerging and developing countries. In this regard, the political commitment of Africa in favor of the free trade, the African trade area, as it was last year, the year 2023, as being the year of the acceleration of the implementation. I'm inviting BRICS to be more interested on this instrument, given that from the report from the CIA, the investment activities and trade of BRICS, they are going to offer important opportunities for the major agricultural sector that is not being exploited in Africa. Furthermore, the access of Africa in G20 that will offer also an opportunity to Africa, a central platform to amplify its position on world economic issues for a more inclusive multilateralism. It will also constitute an opportunity for the continent to work with BRICS in favor of the advent of a world economic governance that is more fair and just. All the actions that we are undertaking in the favor of BRICS and the development cannot last without peace and stability in the world. So I would also like to draw our attention on the agency so that we can seek together means to try and put an end to conflict in Africa, in particular for all extremism. the change of unconstitutional changes that is compromising the peace and stability and prosperity of our continent. So we also need to continue to encourage Russia and Ukraine to put an end to war that is opposing them, given that consequences of this war is not only affecting Europe, but is also affecting the world in general. So, ladies and gentlemen, opportunities given to us today to put together our effort to continue to make this world more just and prosperous by working together in synergy to build a new partnership, frank and then balanced, based on complementarity and not on a form of dependence. And only with that we can constitute a very important force in the world scene, so that we can deal with challenges that our countries are facing, and to reach a peace, stability, and economic growth. Thank you.
All right, BRICS leaders as well as the UN and AU chiefs speaking at the outreach meeting and BRICS Plus dialogue there. And for more, let's go live to CGTN reporter Zhao Yunfei, who has been following those meetings from inside the venue. Yunfei, talk to us about the highlights of what was said.
Well, Zhongshi, now BRICS is not just a gathering of its 5 members. It's actually what you have just witnessed is a gathering of an even larger scale. What we know so far is that leaders from 65 countries have gathered at this circle of the meeting just now. Just now, the leaders of the 5 BRICS members, as well as Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, and the more people on the list are giving the speech. President Xi also delivered a speech, and he spoke a lot about the development. Now, he talked about the global development, and he recognized that there are many challenges that the global development is facing, and therefore all countries should uphold the true multilateralism for giving an international environment for the development. And he says that China stood with developing countries, and President Xi also mentioned about the Global Development Initiative, where he proposed back in 2021, and that initiative really stays focused on the development. And he called for all nations to put development first in order to better allocate the resources. Now, today, many things have been coming out. The outcomes of the BRICS summit is pretty well, and we're recruiting 6. The BRICS is recruiting 6 members to the bloc of emerging economies, and that will open the floor to a new stage of the development of the countries. Now, back to you.
All right, CGTN's Zhao Yunfei live in Johannesburg from inside the venue of the BRICS summit. Yunfei, thank you so much. Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed the outcomes of the BRICS summit. He said BRICS shoulders important responsibilities for world peace and development, and the group's expansion is historic.
This membership expansion is historic. It shows the determination of BRICS countries for unity and cooperation with the broader developing countries. It meets the expectation of the international community and the common interests of emerging market countries and developing countries. The expansion is also a new starting point for BRICS cooperation. It will bring new vigor to the BRICS cooperation mechanism, further strengthen the force for world peace and development.
Let's turn back to our studio discussions about expanded membership at the BRICS. Gentlemen, I just realized I've been picking your brain without crystal balls here, but if we had a crystal ball, what's going to happen in the immediate future? Because even though only 6 countries have been invited to join BRICS this time, but Ramaphosa, on behalf of other BRICS leaders, have also expressed appreciation for the interests expressed by all the other countries. So Professor Liu here, what differences will we see with those 6 new members, 6 new countries on board? That new membership will take effect, of course, starting January next year.
Well, of course, there's a large beef up of their economy, and also there's a larger platform to build more of the resources to synergize. And what can we respect is that the replenishment of the capitalization of the new development bank, which is something that is very substantial. And second, there can be more of the rule-making process. That's because we are accommodating more members, and more of the rules needs to be ratified so that other members can also be able to have more predictability, whether to choose to join or which part to join at what pace. And then a number of projects needs to be identified to be able to work on, because right now roughly 100 projects are being rolled out with the support of the BRICS Bank. And then, with increased capitalization, definitely there will be new projects that can be added onto the list. I think that, and then more of the, even within this group, more of the bilateral, trilateral, or multilateral type of engagement can also be able to take place to work on specific projects that is more strategic to their own national development. And I think lastly is that many of those countries are also being prepared to do a better homework of their own to streamline the domestic affairs, to have a more open economy, and to gather more of the financial strengths to be able to collaborate and qualify with this type of membership and the new drive for BRICS.
Andy, Ramaphosa specifically said that this is just phase one of the expansion, so it's safe to assume that by the time that the leaders gather for the next summit, there could be more work done in terms of criteria, in terms of whether new members will be absorbed at the next summit. What type of progress, what type of differences do you anticipate in the coming year?
Well, I think this is an important historical moment that marks, I think, a new course in the history of mankind. I mean, it sounds quite grandiose to say this, but I think this is a very, very important development. And as you say, Zhongshi, this is only the beginning with this addition of 6 countries. There were more than 20, I think, that formally expressed interest, more than 40 that have some expression of interest. So I think we can expect many more countries, as well as some important changes when we look at the composition of the countries that were admitted. We touched a little bit on Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular for its role in the Middle East, which is geopolitically very important, of course, plays a very important role in the global financial system. So I think looking ahead in the short term, we may see some very, very profound changes beginning to be felt. But of course, these changes take years, maybe even decades to play out. But my hope, too, is that this will send a very positive signal globally and inject more optimism in global economic prospects.
All right, Andy and Professor Liu, stay with me here. And prior to the announcement of Egypt's admission to BRICS, our correspondent Adel El-Marouki interviewed Deputy Speaker of Egyptian Parliament, Mohammed Abul Anain, on the benefits of Egypt joining the bloc.
Earlier this year, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi approved Egypt to join the BRICS NDB Bank in a step for the country to be more integrated with the BRICS countries. I want to know from you, how important is this step for Egypt?
BRICS countries make up about 50% of global investment. It is a big bloc and it has a promising future. We consider China our biggest economic partner. Trade between us reached $15 billion last year. India is a strong partner to Egypt. It is the second biggest Asian partner. Russia is a great country and there is a big deal of investments and trade between us. With BRICS and its NDB Bank, we are talking about the possibility of a new unified currency, which is very important because of the exhaustion the US dollar caused to our economies and how currencies are bound to the dollar exchange rates. The dollar had dangerous impacts on developing countries and burdened its debts. Countries could also rely on their currencies in BRICS trade. There is a new business approach with the NDB. We're seeing development projects in our region which benefits BRICS members. The BRICS Bank also creates competitiveness, with the current financial institutions providing room for better financial facilitations.
How do you evaluate Egypt's business ties with BRICS countries, especially China, and what potential do you see of growing in the future?
Joining BRICS will enable Egypt to reach big agreements for funding or partnering to build massive national projects. Projects like renewable energy, green hydrogen production. We are also witnessing a series of huge natural gas discoveries, which provides us with the power needed to many industries that are capable of having value added to our raw material. Take a look at the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance. Egyptian cities are fully invested in participating in it. We have specialized industrial cities built and spread across the coastal line of the BRI. We have non-traditional industries, which is a great factor for economic development for BRICS nations. Look at Africa's capabilities. It is a young, rising continent that enjoys many riches in natural resources. It can be a global food basket. Add to that African precious metals and stones, granite and marble. There are many treasures.
As a businessman and in your line of business, how do you evaluate your current business ties with the BRICS countries, and what benefit can your line of business have with an Egyptian membership in the BRICS?
Our industrial products could expand further with the renaissance that can happen when our exports to BRICS nations increase, which will also give us more access to non-BRICS countries because investments will increase. We own many tourist resorts. I believe when we are engaged with global markets and an economic renaissance starts, aviation trips between our countries will increase. Railroad and land transportation connectivity will also expand, and therefore tourism will flourish. I think we need more investment in the tourism sector. We need to double the number of resorts and hotels, and this is a promising field for attracting huge investments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, what we have witnessed today really is history in the making. Like Andy said just now, it will be years, maybe decades, before the full ramifications of today's events can be completely understood. But as we prepare to wrap up our coverage today, I do want to get your take on that last part of the meeting, the outreach and the BRICS Plus. The dialogue encompassing a larger group, obviously talking about common challenges and problems in the developing world. Professor Liu, what stood out for you? Obviously, each leader laid out their own set of priorities and had their own vision in mind on how we can tackle these common challenges.
Well, the president of South Africa actually referred to the Bandung conference in 1958. That was really a remarkable time, actually the starting point for South-South cooperation, and a number of principles were set forth. But over the years, because of the Cold War and because of the division of so many countries, and also because of the lack of technological support, financial support, the South cooperation was not really, substantiated as expected. But now, with more of the unity, with more of the information support, and also with more of the financial strength of these nations, they can really team up together to work on their own to solve the imperative, the agenda of their own development. So this also shows the excessive reliance on the Western world support is no longer something that is a prerequisite, and they can really team up and synergize with each other. And plus that with the expansion of the BRICS membership, we can also do not only see the further capitalization, but more of the structural synergy among these countries, given the different development paths and given the comparative advantage of each of the members in the big family.
Andy, we've come a long way from Bandung conference in the 1950s. Now, are the Global South in a better position to cooperate and collaborate and solve their issues collectively?
I think they absolutely are, Zhongshi. And one of the most important takeaways for me of many today, but I think one that I can share now, I think is that this also can be seen as a vindication of China's approach, most recently expressed through the Global Development Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, the Global Security
All right, Andy, I'm
Initiative.
sorry to interrupt you. We have one other stop to make, this one in Ethiopia. As you have heard, Ethiopia will also become a member of BRICS starting 2024, and CGTN's Giram Chala is standing by for us in Addis Ababa. Giram, help us understand the expectations from Ethiopia now that it's been officially invited to join BRICS.
So this is really a special moment, as you've said. Becoming a member of a BRIC nation was a dream that Ethiopia had for a long time.
All right, we're having some technical issues there. Andy, I'm sorry for interrupting you. If you could just continue.
Sure. So I think that this represents a vindication of China's vision, attracting other countries, not just BRICS, but also a broader and growing set of countries. So I think this is a very important and exciting development too, that this alternative view of not a Western-dominated black and white approach, but a more inclusive approach that is more equal and gives opportunity to the diversity of countries around the world is an important milestone.
All right, Andy, Professor Liu, it's been a pleasure having both of you on our special program today. Thank you so much for coming in. And with that, we come to the end of our special coverage on the BRICS Summit in South Africa. I'm Zhong Shi in Beijing. On behalf of the entire team here, thank you so much for watching, and news continues on CGTN.